Pennsylvania's rolling hills and dense forests hide more than just wildlife. They conceal villages shrouded in perpetual fog, abandoned long ago, yet haunted by the whispers of those who vanished without a trace. These hidden villages are places where time seems frozen. Shadows move between the mist, and unexplained lights flicker in empty windows. Locals speak of echoes of footsteps in deserted streets, ghostly figures appearing among the fog, and cold drafts that carry whispered warnings. Many of these villages were the sites of plagues, mysterious disappearances, and tragic accidents, leaving spirits bound to the fog, unable to move on. Tonight, we will explore 25 of Pennsylvania's most haunted, hidden villages, where the fog never lifts, shadows have minds of their own, and the very streets seem to remember every sorrowful event that happened there. Step carefully, for some villages hold memories that cling to the air, and spirits who follow silently long after the sun sets. Mistwood Village, nestled deep in the Pocono Mountains, is a place where time seems to have paused, leaving a haunting stillness in its abandoned streets. Once a thriving community known for its charming cottages, rustic inns, and bustling town square, the village now lies in quiet desolation. Visitors speak of ghostly figures pacing along the empty streets, of cold gusts sweeping through abandoned homes, carrying faint whispers and distant cries. Mistwood Village is not merely an abandoned town. It is a place where the memories of its past residents linger, where the natural beauty of the mountains is overlaid with an unsettling presence that seems to watch, guide, and sometimes reach out to those who wander too long within its boundaries. The first sign that Mistwood Village is not like other abandoned towns often comes in the quiet of evening. As the sun dips behind the Pocono peaks, long shadows stretch across cobblestone streets, and the fading light reveals movement at the edge of perception. Some claim to have glimpsed entire families moving silently in front of boarded-up houses, their forms transparent but unmistakably human, engaged in activities of daily life long since ended. Doors and windows, though weathered and decayed, seem to breathe with invisible currents, and cold gusts often blow through interiors with no apparent source. Visitors stepping into a house report sudden drops in temperature, the kind that makes the air feel heavy and the skin crawl. Within these silent structures, faint whispers sometimes emerge, barely audible, as though carried from another time. Yet guests describe seeing figures moving along these roads at all hours, pacing or walking with a rhythm that seems almost ritualistic. Cold gusts rush through open doorways, brushing past arms and necks, and faint whispers seem to respond to questions asked aloud, though no one else is present. One hiker exploring the outskirts of the village described hearing soft voices calling his name as he passed an empty schoolhouse, only to find the doors firmly locked and no visible signs of entry. These experiences suggest that Mistwood Village interacts with those who wander within it, guiding their steps, echoing their presence, or reminding them that the boundary between past and present here is fragile. Local legends speak of the village's origins and eventual abandonment, offering context to the strange occurrences. Mistwood Village was once a prosperous community, with families, artisans, and travelers passing through its streets. Hollow Creek in Allegheny County is a place where desolation and the supernatural intertwine, a landscape of collapsed buildings, overgrown paths, and dense, lingering fog. Once a small mining community, Hollow Creek fell into ruin decades ago after a series of industrial accidents and economic decline forced its residents to leave. Today, the skeletal remains of homes, storefronts, and factories create a labyrinth of decay, where every corner seems alive with unseen activity. Visitors report shadows moving independently of the thick, rolling fog, darting through collapsed buildings with impossible speed and direction. Some claim to hear the laughter of children echoing across the empty streets, though no one remains to inhabit them. Hollow Creek is not merely abandoned, it's a place where the past asserts itself in spectral. The first indication of Hollow Creek's eerie presence is often visual. The fog, thick and pervasive, clings to the remnants of buildings and swirls around the remnants of broken windows and crumbling walls. Within this mist, shadows are said to move independently, shifting in directions that defy the natural source of light. Visitors have described watching a dark form flit across a collapsed porch, only to vanish when they approach, reappearing seconds later behind a wall or among fallen beams. The experience is disorienting, producing a sense of both nostalgia and unease, a reminder of lives once lived and abruptly ended. Hollow creeks collapsed. Buildings contribute to a landscape that is both physically and psychologically challenging. Roofs sag at unnatural angles. Walls lean unpredictably, and floors are broken and unstable. Visitors must navigate carefully. Yet, many report that even when they avoid physical danger, they cannot escape the movement of shadows or the eerie sounds that seem to follow them. Some have described doors that once stood in particular places appearing elsewhere when retraced. Hallways within broken structures that extend far beyond the expected layout. And staircases that twist into darkness with no discernible logic. The environment itself becomes a participant in the haunting, guiding, obscuring, and amplifying the experiences of those who enter. The shadows of Hollow Creek are not always solitary. Some witnesses claim to have seen multiple forms moving in coordination, darting between buildings in patterns that suggest purpose. One urban explorer reported observing 3 shadowy figures cross a ruined street in unison, pausing briefly as if communicating silently before dissolving into the fog. Others described fleeting glimpses of shapes clustered in empty doorways or perched on collapsing rooftops, only to vanish when attention is focused. These occurrences reinforce the sense that the village is populated by unseen inhabitants, entities that exist parallel to the physical world, yet move through it with remarkable autonomy. Locals and historians offer varied explanations for Hollow Creek's phenomena. Some suggest that the shadows are residual energy left behind by the community's former residents, echoing lives that ended abruptly and tragically. Others point to the natural interplay of fog, light, and decaying structures, which could create optical illusions that appear purposeful. Yet the consistency and specificity of reports shadows that move against wind or light. Laughter with no source, the sensation of being observed, suggests that something more deliberate may be at play. Paranormal researchers have visited the site repeatedly, noting the disorienting quality of the space and the recurrence of certain phenomena, particularly around structures that were once schools, playgrounds, or communal gathering areas. Visitors to Hollow Creek often leave with more than photographs or memories of abandoned architecture. They carry a sense of having glimpsed a layer of reality that exists alongside the ordinary, a world in which shadows move with intent. Laughter echoes from the past, and collapsed buildings conceal unseen residents. Some report lingering feelings of unease or being watched long after they leave, as though a part of the village has followed them beyond its physical boundaries. Fogbank Village in Lancaster County is a place where abandonment and the supernatural converge, shrouded perpetually in mist and shadow. Once a thriving rural community, Fogbank Village now lies largely forgotten, with streets overtaken by dense undergrowth and homes slowly succumbing to decay. Others have described walking along the main thoroughfare and feeling the presence of someone moving just beyond the mist, their eyes seemingly fixed on the visitor, even though no living person remains in the village. The flickering lights inside abandoned windows add to the unnerving atmosphere. They are never constant, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. Some visitors claim the lights respond to their presence, glowing as they pass by certain buildings and extinguishing as they move away. A researcher exploring the village at night described approaching a large, two-story house whose upper windows glowed faintly. As he drew nearer, the lights flickered rapidly, then vanished entirely. Moments later, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees beside the house, moving with an unnatural grace before melting into the fog. The roads, cracked and overgrown, wind unpredictably between houses and empty lots, creating a labyrinthine effect. Visitors often report losing their bearings, finding themselves retracing steps along streets that appear subtly altered from memory. Some describe seeing figures on one street that suddenly appear on another, as though the shadows traverse spaces imperceptibly, unhindered by physical barriers. The auditory cues, combined with fleeting visual phenomena, create an immersive experience in which the past feels vividly present, and the boundary between reality and memory becomes tenuous. Local lore suggests that Fogbank Village's spectral activity is tied to its abrupt abandonment. Once a hub of farming and small industry, the community suffered a series of hardships: economic collapse, illness, and a sudden fire that destroyed part of the town. Paranormal researchers have theorized that the village retains echoes of its former life, with shadows representing the movements of past residents and flickering lights marking spaces that were once active. The combination of decaying architecture, overgrown streets, flickering lights, and moving figures creates a setting both visually striking and emotionally intense. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity and the hope of witnessing the unexplained again, while others depart quietly, haunted by the impression that they were observed, followed, or guided by unseen forces. Ravenshade, tucked deep in the forests of Schuylkill County, is a place where the quiet of nature meets the unsettling presence of the supernatural. Once a small rural settlement, Ravenshade has long been abandoned, its roads overgrown and its buildings slowly decaying. Yet, despite its desolation, the area exerts an eerie pull on those who venture near. Shadowy forms are often seen moving along the roads at dusk, figures that appear human but lack any discernible features, gliding silently among the trees and mist. Cold drafts sweep across open clearings, and visitors frequently report whispered warnings that seem to follow them, carried on the wind from unseen sources. Ravenshade is not merely deserted. It is a place alive with the lingering presence of forces, both unknown and restless, where every step taken feels observed and every shadow holds intention. Approaching Ravenshade, visitors notice the forest thickening and the roads narrowing, winding between skeletal trees that have long overtaken the old pathways. The sun often seems to set differently here, the fading light mingling with an unnatural fog that rolls down from the hills and drifts across the cracked asphalt. It is during these twilight hours that the village's ghostly presence becomes most apparent. Shadowy forms appear along the roads, moving with a deliberate rhythm, as if performing some silent ritual. Witnesses describe the figures as tall, thin, and indistinct, often dissolving into the mist when approached, only to reappear moments later, further down the path. Some have described seeing more than one shadow at a time, pacing or gliding in coordination, as though the forest itself had organized them into patterns beyond comprehension. Cold drafts are a constant and unnerving presence in Ravenshade. Even on relatively warm days, the air along the roads and through the ruined buildings can turn icy without warning. Visitors report the sudden chill brushing past their arms and necks, chilling them to the bone, often accompanied by the sensation of being watched. The drafts sometimes carry whispers, low and urgent, words in a language or tone that is nearly impossible to decipher. Some claim to hear warnings, names called aloud, instructions, or faint admonitions, meant only for those who wandered too far into the woods. A hiker recounted feeling a cold breeze wrap around her as she approached a collapsed farmhouse, hearing a whisper telling her to turn back, though she could see no one. The sense of an unseen presence, guiding or admonishing, is persistent and difficult to shake. Buildings in Ravenshade, long abandoned, contribute to the area's unnerving atmosphere. Wooden cabins lean at unnatural angles, their roofs sagged and windows broken. Doors hang from rusted hinges, and the remnants of porches collapse under the weight of time. Within these structures, the whispers and drafts seem more concentrated. Visitors entering the buildings report shadows moving along walls and floors, darting in ways that defy natural movement. Some say they have glimpsed figures looking out from shattered windows, only to vanish when approached. Others describe interiors that seem subtly rearranged, furniture or debris shifting when no one is inside. Even the quietest steps echo unnaturally, as if the structures themselves respond to each movement, amplifying the sensation that the settlement is alive with unseen inhabitants. The roads and trails of Ravenshade enhance the disorientation and unease. Cracked asphalt, overgrown with weeds and moss, winds unpredictably between ruined homes and open fields. Visitors often report feeling as though the paths have changed when retracing their steps, or that the shadows seem to anticipate their movements, appearing just ahead or disappearing when they try to get closer. Some explorers claim to have seen the shadowy forms vanish only to reappear at impossible angles, moving through terrain in ways that defy logic. The combination of decaying roads, dense fog, and moving figures creates an environment that is both physically and psychologically challenging, instilling a persistent sense of caution and heightened awareness. Faint footsteps echo along empty roads, often matching the pace of those who walk alone. Whispered warnings come from multiple directions at once, difficult to localize, sometimes repeating phrases or names in urgent tones. One visitor described hearing what sounded like children playing near a long-collapsed barn, only to find it empty when she approached. The interplay of natural sounds and unexplained phenomena creates an immersive experience, making it difficult to distinguish between reality and perception, further enhancing the village's spectral reputation. Local lore suggests that Ravenshade's haunting is tied to the tragedies and sudden abandonment that befell the settlement decades ago. Economic hardship, mining accidents, and mysterious disappearances drove residents away, yet stories claim that some spirits never left. Shadowy forms and whispering drafts may be remnants of those who lingered in the village's final days, their presence echoing the abruptness and despair of the past. Paranormal researchers have suggested that Ravenshade serves as a convergence point for residual energies, amplified by the fog and isolation of the location. Others argue that the human mind, attuned to isolation and decay, interprets natural movements and sounds as sentient. Yet the consistency of reports across decades suggests a phenomenon that defies easy explanation. Visitors often leave Ravenshade with lasting impressions of unease and fascination. The shadowy forms, cold drafts, and whispered warnings create experiences that linger long after leaving the roads and forests. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or a desire to confront the unknown, while others quietly depart, unnerved by the persistent sense of being watched or followed. The village imprints itself on memory, leaving every traveler with the impression of a place where the line between the living and the spectral is thin, and where the past continues to move and breathe through the fog and ruins. In Ravenshade, shadowy forms glide along deserted roads at dusk. Cold drafts sweep through abandoned structures, and whispered warnings follow anyone who dares to enter. The overgrown streets, ruined buildings, and dense fog combine to create an environment where perception bends and time seems fluid. Each shadow, each whisper, and each gust of cold air is a reminder that the village is far from lifeless. Ravenshade exists in a state between memory and reality, a place where the past persists and where the presence of the unseen is as palpable as the forest itself, leaving every visitor with an indelible impression of mystery, fear, and spectral beauty. Duskwood, hidden deep within the forests of Monroe County, is a place where the ordinary fades and the supernatural thrives. Once a small rural settlement, it has long been abandoned, leaving behind a collection of overgrown yards, crumbling homes, and narrow lanes that wind through thick woodland. Visitors to Duskwood often describe a haunting stillness, broken only by the sound of unseen footsteps and the whisper of the wind through dense trees. Figures appear pacing silently through the overgrown yards, their forms indistinct yet unmistakably human, moving with a purpose that feels both deliberate and otherworldly. Fog rolls unnaturally across the streets and fields, thickening in moments when it should have dissipated, hiding movements that vanish when approached. Duskwood is not merely a ghost town. It is a place where the past seems alive, and the unseen is constantly at play. The first indication that Duskwood is different from other abandoned towns often comes in the late afternoon, as the sun begins to dip behind the forested hills. Shadows lengthen, and the air grows dense with mist. Visitors report seeing forms gliding silently across yards, moving as if they are following routines long since abandoned. One hiker recounted seeing a tall figure pacing near a collapsed fence, pausing to glance toward a crumbling farmhouse, then vanishing entirely as he stepped closer. Others described multiple figures moving in tandem, circling through overgrown gardens and abandoned pathways, appearing and disappearing with an almost rhythmic precision. The movements are unnerving because they suggest awareness and intelligence behind the shadows that observes and reacts to the living. The fog that blankets Duskwood contributes to the village's unnerving atmosphere. Unlike ordinary morning mist or evening haze, this fog behaves as though it has a will of its own, rolling unnaturally across yards, curling around abandoned buildings, and thickening in places where shadows appear. Visitors have reported stepping into what seems like a clear path, only to be enveloped by the fog moments later, hiding movements that vanish when approached. One photographer describes seeing a group of figures walking along a lane just beyond the fog's edge. He moved to get a better angle, but the forms dissolved into the mist before his eyes, leaving only the impression of presence and movement. The fog seems to both conceal and reveal, shaping the experience of Duskwood as a place where reality and perception are constantly in flux. Abandoned homes and structures in Duskwood amplify its haunting qualities. Weathered wooden houses lean precariously, their windows broken or boarded, roofs sagging with the weight of decades of neglect. Visitors often report that figures appear inside these buildings, glimpsed through shattered glass or doorways, only to vanish when the threshold is crossed. Overgrown yards, long since reclaimed by nature, are filled with the subtle evidence of life that once was: paths trampled through grass, rusted fences, and the occasional remnants of children's toys or garden tools. Figures pacing among these spaces are often described as spectral echoes of the past, moving along familiar routines that no longer belong to living residents. Sounds in Duskwood are as disconcerting as its sights. Footsteps echo along empty pathways, sometimes matching the pace of a visitor walking alone. Rustling leaves and creaking timbers seem to occur in patterns that suggest presence rather than randomness. Some witnesses report faint whispers drifting on the wind, carrying warnings or the remnants of conversations from long ago. One explorer described hearing the faint sound of a woman calling a name as he crossed the central yard of the settlement. He paused, calling out in response, yet no answer came. Only the creeping sensation that someone or something was observing his every move. These auditory phenomena blend with visual sightings to create an immersive, unsettling experience, reinforcing the sense that Duskwood is alive with the unseen. Local legends attempt to explain the village's enduring haunting. Some speak of lives abruptly ended, illnesses, accidents, and tragedies that prevented residents from leaving peacefully. Others claim that certain spirits never departed, tied to the land and buildings through unresolved events. Paranormal investigators have noted patterns of residual energy, suggesting that the figures seen pacing may be echoes of past routines, trapped within the village's structures and yards. Yet even skeptics are often unsettled by the consistency of reports, particularly those describing movements and appearances that seem purposeful and aware. Visitors often leave Duskwood with more than photographs or memories of ruined homes. Many report lingering sensations of being observed long after leaving the village, as if a part of the place has followed them into the wider world. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity, a desire to witness the unexplained, or an inexplicable connection to the spectral echoes that inhabit the overgrown yards and fog-draped streets. The village leaves a lasting impression on those who enter, a sense that time and space are malleable here, and that the unseen remains active, aware, and persistent. In Duskwood, figures pace silently through overgrown yards, appearing with deliberate intent, while fog rolls unnaturally across streets and fields, concealing movements that vanish when approached. The abandoned homes, twisting pathways, and encroaching forest create an environment in which perception bends and reality feels fragile. Visitors encounter shadows that move independently, hear whispers carried on the cold evening air, and witness moments that defy explanation. Duskwood exists as a place suspended between past and present, between memory and apparition, where every visitor experiences the lingering presence of those who never left. The village is a living relic, a space where the spectral and the natural coexist, leaving an indelible impression of mystery, unease, and the haunting beauty of what remains unseen. Silent Hollow, nestled deep in Westmoreland County, is a place where silence carries a weight beyond the ordinary. Once a small, vibrant settlement, it now lies abandoned, its roads cracked and overgrown, its houses succumbing to decay and time. Visitors report ghostly footsteps echoing along deserted streets long after the last living resident departed. Shadowy figures appear near abandoned wells, along broken fences, and among the trees, only to vanish instantly when approached. Silent Hollow is more than an empty town. It is a space where the past lingers, where unseen presences move among the ruins, and where every sound and shadow hints at the lives once lived here. Approaching Silent Hollow, travelers notice the landscape change subtly. The sun often seems to dim as it touches the town, its rays filtered through thick layers of fog that settle among the ruins. It is at this threshold that visitors first notice the unusual movements, shadows that dart across cracked roads, figures glimpsed pacing near abandoned wells, and flickers of motion among the skeletal remains of buildings. These figures are never fully defined, sometimes tall and elongated, sometimes blurred, but they move with a deliberate rhythm, as though following routines from long ago. The wells scattered throughout the town are central to many of the village's spectral sightings. Once vital to daily life, these structures now stand as dark, gaping voids in the overgrown yards. Visitors often report seeing shadowy forms hovering near them, peering down into the darkness, and vanishing as they draw near. One explorer described standing at the edge of a well at twilight, noticing a dark figure leaning over the rim. As he approached to look, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving only a faint impression of movement. Others recount similar experiences, shadows pacing the perimeter, figures appearing in the fog, and the sensation of being watched from the depths of the abandoned wells. Ghostly footsteps are another frequent phenomenon. Even when visitors are alone, the sound of walking echoes along the cracked asphalt, sometimes matching their own pace, sometimes coming from directions that make no sense. The footsteps can be slow and deliberate, or quick and fleeting, vanishing as suddenly as they appear. One photographer, attempting to document the abandoned town, reported walking down a lane when a distinct set of steps followed him for several minutes. Each time he paused, the footsteps stopped. When he resumed walking, they continued. There was no one in sight, yet the rhythm of movement was undeniable, as if the town itself had a pulse of unseen life. The abandoned homes of Silent Hollow contribute to its pervasive unease. Wooden houses lean precariously, their paint peeled and windows shattered. Porches sag and roofs caved long ago, yet the buildings retain an uncanny sense of presence. Visitors report glimpsing shadowy figures moving across floors, standing in doorways, or peering from broken windows. Some figures are seen repeatedly, pacing the same path through a yard or circling a house, then disappearing just as the observer focuses attention on them. Inside these homes, cold drafts seem to move against the natural flow of air, carrying with them faint whispers or distant creaks, adding to the disorienting atmosphere. The roads themselves are unsettling, cracked, moss-covered, and winding unpredictably through the town. They give a sense of dislocation, as if space and time bend subtly in Silent Hollow. Travelers often report that streets appear altered when retraced. A path they walked an hour ago may now feel longer, or a building they passed seems to have shifted slightly. Shadowy figures respond in ways that reinforce the feeling of being observed, moving ahead, vanishing when approached, or reappearing in unexpected locations. These experiences create a profound sense of unease, as if the town is alive with the memories and movements of those who once inhabited it. Auditory phenomena are as common as visual sightings. The hollow echoes of footsteps are often accompanied by whispers and murmurs that drift on the wind. These sounds can be fleeting or persistent, sometimes forming patterns that feel almost conversational. One visitor described hearing a soft, urgent voice calling a name as he walked past an abandoned schoolhouse. Turning to respond, he saw nothing but the fog rolling along the cracked road. Others report the rustle of leaves in unnatural sequences, the creaking of boards underfoot, and occasional laughter that seems to emerge from nowhere, particularly near wells or overgrown yards. The combination of sound, shadow, and fog makes the environment immersive and unsettling, reinforcing the town's haunted reputation. Local legends surrounding Silent Hollow often point to tragedy and sudden departure. Families left abruptly, lives ended prematurely, and events that remain undocumented left lingering impressions on the village. Some claim that those who vanished never truly departed, their presences preserved in the spaces they once inhabited. Paranormal investigators have suggested that the echoes of daily life, grief, and unresolved events remain concentrated in the town's ruins, manifesting as shadows and footsteps that follow visitors. Even skeptics, who walk the roads with caution, report moments of profound unease, particularly near wells, corners, and overgrown pathways where the spectral activity seems strongest. Visitors to Silent Hollow leave with lasting impressions. Many report a sense of being observed long after they have left, as if a part of the town's spectral inhabitants has lingered with them. Some return, drawn by curiosity or a desire to witness the unexplainable again. Others quietly depart, unsettled by the persistent sense of unseen eyes following their steps. The town impresses upon every traveler a feeling that the past is not truly gone, that life and death coexist in the crumbling roads, overgrown yards, and abandoned wells. In Silent Hollow, ghostly footsteps echo along cracked roads, shadowy figures appear near abandoned wells, and the fog rolls unnaturally, concealing movements that vanish when approached. The abandoned homes, overgrown streets, and skeletal structures of the town create an environment where perception bends and reality feels fragile. Visitors encounter shadows that move independently, hear whispers carried on the cold evening air, and witness phenomena that defy explanation. Silent Hollow exists as a liminal space, a crossroads of memory and the unseen, where the presence of the past is tangible, and every visitor leaves with the undeniable impression that the town, though empty, has never truly been abandoned. Black Mist Village, hidden in the rolling hills of Carbon County, is a place where silence and unease coexist, and where the remnants of human habitation seem infused with something far older and darker. Once a modest mining and farming community, the village was gradually abandoned over decades, leaving behind crumbling buildings, broken streets, and overgrown yards. Today, it is a location of persistent whispers, spectral sightings, and a fog that seems to cling to the village long after the surrounding forest has cleared. Visitors to Black Mist Village often report muffled cries and chanting echoing through empty streets, a haunting soundtrack to the eerie landscape. Shadowy figures are seen moving along rooftops and among trees, vanishing instantly when approached, leaving behind only the unsettling sense that the village is alive in ways invisible to the eye. Approaching Black Mist Village, travelers first notice the thick fog that blankets the landscape, rolling unnaturally through the streets and alleys. As the sun sets, the fog deepens, giving the town a spectral quality, as if time itself has slowed. These sounds are unsettling because they are neither continuous nor predictable, fading into silence one moment and returning with haunting clarity the next. Figures on rooftops are among the most unnerving aspects of Black Mist Village. Some figures are tall and human-like, others elongated and distorted, but all disappear the moment anyone attempts to approach. Others have described multiple figures appearing simultaneously, pacing along the ridges of abandoned homes, then dissolving into the mist, reinforcing the sense that the village is patrolled by unseen inhabitants. Visitors often describe glimpsing shadows through the broken windows, standing silently or pacing in rooms long since abandoned. The chanting and muffled cries sometimes appear to originate from within these structures, as though the echoes of past events have been preserved in the walls and floors. Some guests have even reported cold drafts passing through the houses, carrying with them whispers that are urgent yet impossible to interpret. The streets and pathways of Black Mist Village are equally disorienting. Narrow, cracked roads wind between homes and open fields in ways that make it difficult to retrace steps. The fog thickens in certain areas, hiding what lies ahead, and shadows often seem to anticipate movement, appearing where no observer expects. Visitors report feeling as though they are being guided or even herded by unseen forces, shadows moving ahead to shape their path or vanish when confronted. One explorer described attempting to cross the main square when he noticed a figure standing at the edge of a collapsed well. Rhythmic, chanting low, resonant, and seemingly ceremonial echoes through the empty streets and fields, creating an atmosphere of ritualistic unease. One visitor reported standing near the center of town as the chanting grew louder, only to find the streets empty, the fog swirling unnaturally, and a sudden chill brushing past his arms. The combination of sound, shadow, and fog makes the experience immersive, instilling both fear and fascination in those who enter. Local legend holds that Black Mist Village's haunting stems from tragedies long buried in its history. Miners lost in accidents, families displaced by hardship, and unrecorded rituals all contribute to the village's dark reputation. Some say that the figures pacing rooftops are spirits who never left, trapped by unresolved events or drawn back by something they cannot abandon. Paranormal researchers note patterns in the reports, occurrent sightings along the same streets, sounds emanating from similar locations, and fog behaving in ways that amplify visual and auditory experiences. Skeptics suggest natural explanations, but even the most cautious admit the village exerts a weight and awareness that is difficult to reconcile with reason. Visitors often leave Black Mist Village carrying more than photographs or memories of crumbling buildings. Many describe lingering feelings of being observed, followed, or guided by unseen forces long after they have left the site. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or a desire to witness the supernatural firsthand. Others depart quietly, unsettled by the presence of shadows on rooftops and the echo of cries that seem to come from nowhere. The village leaves an indelible impression, a reminder that the past is never truly gone and that the line between the living and the unseen can be startlingly thin. In Black Mist Village, muffled cries and chanting echo through fog-laden streets, while shadowy figures move along rooftops and vanish when confronted. The crumbling homes, overgrown yards, and narrow, twisting roads combine to create an environment where perception bends and reality feels uncertain. Visitors encounter movements and sounds that defy logic, shadows that seem aware of their presence, and a fog that conceals and reveals with equal purpose. Black Mist Village exists as a liminal space, a place suspended between past and present, memory and apparition, where every visitor becomes part of a narrative shaped by loss, mystery, and the lingering presence of the unseen. Shadewood, nestled deep in the forests of Luzerne County, is a place where light and shadow play tricks on the mind, and where the natural world blends seamlessly with the supernatural. Once a quiet settlement surrounded by dense woods, Shadewood has long been abandoned, leaving behind overgrown streets, crumbling homes, and a lingering atmosphere that unsettles even the bravest visitors. Flickering lights appear intermittently among the fog, illuminating trees and structures in brief, ghostly bursts. Visitors describe the sensation of unseen eyes following their movements, the unmistakable presence of something just beyond sight. Shadowy figures flit between the trees, disappearing the moment one turns to face them, leaving behind a chilling impression that the forest itself is alive with watchful spirits. The approach to Shadewood sets the tone for the experiences within. As travelers move along winding country roads, the forest closes in, branches entwining overhead, casting long, unnatural shadows across the path. By late afternoon, a fog often descends, thickening as night approaches, turning familiar shapes into ambiguous forms. It is within this haze that the flickering lights become most pronounced. Some lights appear to emanate from abandoned homes, their windows glowing briefly before plunging back into darkness. Others seem suspended in midair among the trees, flickering in patterns that are impossible to predict. One visitor reported walking along a side road when a sudden light illuminated a clearing. A figure appeared at the edge of the trees, motionless, and vanished the instant he focused on it. The shadowy figures that inhabit Shadewood are elusive yet persistent. Guests often see them moving quickly between trees, their movements deliberate but fleeting, leaving no traces on the ground or in the mist. Some describe these figures as human in shape, others more distorted, as if the fog itself shapes them. One hiker recounted seeing 3 figures pacing near a collapsed barn, gliding silently across the field, then vanishing into the fog when approached. Others have reported glimpsing a figure standing at the edge of a clearing, only to find it gone when they stepped closer, leaving them with an unsettling impression that they had been observed the entire time. The forest seems to guide the movements of these figures, offering glimpses that disappear before reality can fully register them. The flickering lights in Shadewood are both captivating and unnerving. Unlike ordinary lanterns or electrical failures, these lights appear and vanish in patterns that defy logic, sometimes reacting to the movements of visitors. A photographer reported trying to capture a glowing window in an abandoned home, only for the light to flicker and disappear the moment he aimed his camera. The interplay of light, shadow, and mist creates an environment where perception bends, and the ordinary world feels suspended. Visitors frequently report feeling unseen eyes watching them throughout Shadewood. This sensation is not tied to a single location, but persists along roads, through yards, and in the spaces between trees. Some describe the feeling of being followed by invisible presences, their attention constant, yet imperceptible. One explorer recounted walking along the main street of the village when the hairs on his neck stood on end, as if someone or something was tracking his every move. Shadows shifted at the edge of his vision, and lights flickered in synchrony with his steps, reinforcing the impression of awareness and intent. The abandoned structures of Shadewood contribute to its haunted ambience. Wooden cottages lean precariously, their roofs sagged and windows broken. Porches collapse under the weight of time, and vegetation climbs walls, obscuring details of a past life. Visitors often report seeing figures inside these homes, standing in darkened rooms or pacing along floors, disappearing when doors are approached. Some claim to have heard whispers echoing through the buildings, phrases indistinct yet urgent, adding a layer of auditory unease to the already unsettling visuals. These abandoned homes act as anchors for the village's spectral activity, concentrating the presence of shadowy figures and unexplained phenomena in ways that are impossible to ignore. The fog and natural environment of Shadewood amplify its eerie qualities. Roads twist unpredictably, lined with thick undergrowth and towering trees that block sight. Visitors report losing orientation, retracing steps along streets that appear subtly altered, while shadowy figures flit along their path, appearing and disappearing in ways that suggest awareness. Sounds carried on the fog-rustling leaves, distant creaks, faint footsteps, blend with the visual phenomena, creating an immersive experience that blurs the line between reality and the supernatural. The village itself feels alive, not in the conventional sense, but as a place aware of every visitor, guiding, observing, and shaping the experience in ways both subtle and undeniable. Local legends suggest that Shadewood's hauntings are tied to its abrupt abandonment and the tragedies that befell its residents. Illness, accidents, and unresolved disputes drove many to leave, but some stories claim that certain spirits never departed. Shadowy figures and flickering lights may represent the lingering presence of those who remained, tied to the land, the homes, and the trees in ways that defy understanding. Paranormal researchers suggest that the village functions as a liminal space, where energy from past lives is amplified by the fog and isolation, creating a setting in which visitors experience interactions with forces that are simultaneously present and intangible. Visitors leave Shadewood with impressions that linger long after departure. Many speak of an uncanny feeling of being watched, of lights that flicker in memory, and shadows that seem to follow them in quiet moments. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to confront the unknown. Others leave quietly, disturbed by the sensation of unseen eyes tracking every step, and by the figures that flit between trees, always just beyond grasp. The village imprints itself on memory as a place where the past is never truly gone, and where unseen presences continue to inhabit the spaces they once called home. In Shadewood, flickering lights illuminate fog-laden streets, shadowy figures move silently among trees, and visitors feel the persistent gaze of unseen eyes. The abandoned homes, twisting roads, and dense forests create an environment in which perception bends and reality becomes uncertain. Visitors encounter moments that defy explanation, shadows that seem aware, and an atmosphere of tension and anticipation that lingers long after they leave. Shadewood exists as a living memory of the past, a spectral landscape where the unseen walks alongside the present, leaving every traveler with an indelible impression of mystery, unease, and the haunting beauty of what cannot be fully seen. Nightfall, nestled deep within the forests of Centre County, is a place where silence is heavy and the past seems unwilling to let go. Once a small, thriving village, it now lies abandoned. Its streets cracked and overgrown, its homes reduced to skeletal remains of timber and stone. Visitors often report seeing figures near the ruined homes, moving silently as though performing tasks from long ago. Shadows flit along the edges of broken windows, slip between crumbling walls, and vanish the instant anyone draws near. The air itself seems alive with whispers, faint and disjointed, repeating names and unfinished phrases, echoing the lives that once filled this village. Nightfall is not merely deserted, it is a place where memory, presence, and unseen forces linger, making every step an uneasy journey into the unknown. Approaching nightfall, travelers notice the way the surrounding forest presses inward. Branches twist over cracked roads, casting jagged shadows that dance in the fading light. By late afternoon, a low mist often drifts through the village, thickening as night falls, giving the ruins an ethereal quality. It is during these hours that visitors first notice the figures. Dark silhouettes move along the perimeters of ruined homes, glide through broken windows, or linger near collapsed fences. These forms are never fully distinct, often blurred at the edges as if made from smoke or fog. Yet their presence is undeniable, felt in sudden chills, the creak of loose floorboards, or the faint rustle of unseen movement. The ruined homes themselves amplify the haunting atmosphere. Wooden houses lean precariously, roofs sagging, windows shattered or boarded, and gardens overtaken by wild growth. Inside, shadowy forms are sometimes glimpsed pacing floors, standing in darkened doorways, or disappearing through walls that no longer exist. One visitor recounted peering through a broken window to see a figure moving along the floor of a house, following a deliberate path as though trapped in an invisible loop. When he blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only the quiet settling of timber and the distant sound of wind through the trees. Others report similar experiences, seeing multiple figures in motion, vanishing and reappearing in patterns that suggest consciousness and intent. The whispers that fill nightfall add another layer of unease. They are rarely coherent, often fragmentary, repeating names, half-phrases, or questions left unfinished. A hiker recalled walking along the main street when a soft, urgent whisper seemed to call her name, followed by murmured words she could not understand. When she turned, there was nothing, only fog drifting between the ruins and the weight of unseen observation. The whispers appeared to emanate from different locations at once, weaving through the mist and creating a disorienting sense that the village itself remembers every voice and every footstep that ever passed through it. The streets and pathways contribute to the eerie sensation of being watched. Cracked and uneven, they twist between homes and open fields in ways that make navigation difficult. Visitors frequently report feeling drawn toward certain buildings or corners, guided or perhaps herded by an unseen presence. Shadowy figures often appear at the edge of perception, moving with deliberate slowness, then vanishing when focused upon directly. Local legend suggests that nightfall's hauntings are rooted in abrupt abandonment and unrecorded tragedies. Families left suddenly, accidents claimed lives, and unresolved disputes left emotional energy lingering in the environment. Many believe the figures seen in the village are spirits who never departed, bound to familiar paths, structures, and routines. Paranormal researchers have noted recurring patterns, sightings in specific locations, repeated whispers of names and phrases, and consistent reports of figures moving through the fog. Even skeptics concede that nightfall exerts a presence difficult to explain, a weight of awareness that lingers in the mist and ruins. Visitors often leave nightfall with a sense of unease that remains long after departure. Many speak of feeling observed, of hearing echoes of whispers in quiet moments, and recalling the shadowy figures glimpsed through fog and broken windows. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the phenomena firsthand. Others depart quietly, unnerved by the intensity of presence in a village that no longer belongs to the living. Nightfall impresses itself on memory, a place where the past refuses to fade, and where every shadow and whisper carries the imprint of lives that linger invisibly. In nightfall, figures move silently near ruined homes, shadows flit through broken windows, and whispers repeat names and unfinished phrases. The fog-laden streets, crumbling structures, and overgrown paths create an environment where perception bends and reality feels fragile. Visitors encounter phenomena that defy explanation, senses of being watched, and fleeting movements that leave a lasting impression. Nightfall exists as a space where the past endures, where unseen presences continue to inhabit the abandoned village, and where every visitor leaves with an undeniable sense of mystery, unease, and the lingering weight of what cannot be seen. Gray Hollow, tucked deep within the rolling forests of Pike County, is a place where the past lingers like a shadow and the present feels uncertain. Once a modest village, it has long been abandoned, leaving behind crumbling buildings, cracked roads, and overgrown yards that seem to swallow the remnants of human habitation. Visitors report an unsettling sensation of being followed as they wander the streets, as though the very air carries awareness of their presence. Shadowy forms move silently among the ruins, slipping between trees and collapsed structures, vanishing when approached, yet leaving a palpable sense of observation. Gray Hollow is more than deserted. It is a place where memory, presence, and the unseen intertwine, creating an environment that unsettles even the most seasoned explorers. Approaching Gray Hollow, travelers notice the way the forest encroaches upon the village. Branches twist over cracked roads, casting jagged shadows that shift as the light fades. By late afternoon, a low mist often drifts through the town, clinging to the decaying buildings and thickening as dusk approaches. It is during this time that visitors first report the sensation of being followed. Footsteps echo faintly on the uneven streets, sometimes matching their own pace, other times coming from angles that defy logic. One hiker recounted walking along the main thoroughfare when he felt a persistent gaze on his back. Every time he paused to look behind him, nothing was there, yet the feeling never dissipated, as if unseen eyes moved with him. The crumbling buildings of Gray Hollow amplify its haunting atmosphere. Wooden homes lean precariously, their roofs sagged and windows shattered, while remnants of fences, garden tools, and toppled furniture litter overgrown yards. Figures are often glimpsed moving among these structures, appearing as dark, human-shaped shadows that glide silently across floors or between rooms. One visitor described peering into a collapsed house to see a shadow pacing along the remaining wall, following a path that suggested long-practiced routine. As he blinked, the figure dissolved, leaving only the sound of a distant, echoing footstep and the creak of old timber settling. Others have reported multiple figures pacing simultaneously, vanishing and reappearing in ways that suggest awareness and intentional movement. The sensation of being followed is reinforced by subtle auditory phenomena. Even when the streets are empty, visitors report hearing faint whispers carried on the wind, the scrape of shoes on rubble, and occasional soft calls of names or incomplete phrases. A photographer, attempting to document the ruins, recalled the sound of footsteps behind him that mirrored his movements precisely, fading whenever he stopped and resuming when he moved again. These experiences contribute to the feeling that Gray Hollow is not merely empty but aware, responding to those who enter and shaping the perception of presence. Shadowy figures move with a fluidity that makes them difficult to track or define. Some are human-like, others elongated or distorted, but all share an uncanny ability to appear and vanish at will. Visitors often see these forms slipping between trees, gliding across broken rooftops, or pacing along crumbling walls. One explorer reported noticing a figure moving along the roofline of an abandoned store, following him with precise, deliberate steps. When he focused directly, the figure disappeared into the fog, only to reappear moments later at the far edge of a yard. The figure's movements suggest familiarity with the village, as if they are tied to routines and spaces from a life that once was. The village roads themselves contribute to the disorienting atmosphere. Cracked and winding, they twist unpredictably through the overgrown village, creating a sense that time and space bend within Gray Hollow. Visitors often report paths seeming longer than remembered, corners appearing shifted, and buildings changing slightly when retracing steps. Shadowy figures are frequently observed along these roads, appearing just beyond the mist, moving silently in ways that suggest intelligence and awareness. The combination of visual and auditory phenomena creates an immersive, unsettling environment, leaving visitors unsure of where reality ends and illusion begins. Local legend offers explanations for Gray Hollow's persistent haunting. Some say the village was abruptly abandoned due to tragedy, families lost to illness, accidents in the surrounding forest, or disputes that left unresolved energy lingering. The shadowy figures are believed to be the spirits of those who never departed. Moving along familiar routes and observing intruders, paranormal researchers have noted patterns in sightings, repeated appearances in certain areas, movements that suggest awareness, and auditory phenomena that correspond to locations of significance. Even skeptics concede that the village exerts an influence that cannot be easily explained by natural means, noting the consistency of reports across decades. Visitors often leave Gray Hollow with a lasting sense of unease. Many report a lingering impression of unseen observers, shadows that seem to follow them beyond the village, and footsteps echoing in memory long after departure. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or a desire to witness the phenomena firsthand. Others quietly depart, disturbed by the awareness of unseen presences and the pervasive weight of history embedded in every building and yard. The village leaves an indelible mark, reminding all who enter that the past is never truly gone, and that the line between the living and the unseen can be startlingly thin. In Gray Hollow, shadowy figures move silently among crumbling buildings, gliding along streets and vanishing when approached. Visitors experience the constant sensation of being followed. Footsteps echoing along cracked roads, whispers drifting through the mist, and glimpses of forms just beyond sight. The abandoned homes, overgrown yards, and winding streets create an environment in which perception bends and reality feels fragile. Gray Hollow exists as a place where the past is ever present, where unseen eyes observe every movement, and where every visitor leaves with a lingering impression of mystery, unease, and a spectral presence that inhabits the village long after its residents have vanished. Phantom Ridge, perched atop the rolling hills of Blair County, is a place where silence stretches endlessly, and the line between reality and the supernatural seems to blur. Once a thriving village, it now lies abandoned, its streets cracked and overgrown, its buildings reduced to weathered shells of timber and brick. Visitors often report seeing figures gliding along the empty streets, moving with a quiet, deliberate purpose, vanishing as quickly as they appear. Unexplained lights flash intermittently in the abandoned windows, illuminating the crumbling structures for brief moments, as though the past is reaching out from behind the shadows. Phantom Ridge is more than deserted. It is a place alive with the echoes of memory and the persistent presence of unseen forces. Approaching Phantom Ridge, travelers first notice the way the surrounding forest presses against the roads. Trees arch over the pathways, their branches intertwining to form shadows that twist and shift with the setting sun. A low mist often settles over the village in the late afternoon, thickening as night falls and creating a sense of disorientation. It is during these hours that the most unsettling phenomena occur. Figures appear along the streets, dark and fluid, gliding silently over cracked asphalt or through patches of overgrown grass. Their forms are often indistinct, sometimes human-like, sometimes elongated or distorted, and they vanish when approached, leaving behind only the sound of a distant creak or the whisper of wind. The abandoned buildings of Phantom Ridge contribute to its haunting atmosphere. Wooden homes lean precariously, their roofs sagging and windows broken. While brick structures are crumbling, vines crawling across fractured walls. Inside, shadowy forms are sometimes glimpsed moving through hallways or standing at the edge of rooms, disappearing the moment a door is opened. One visitor recounted looking through a shattered window into what was once a small shop. A figure appeared behind the counter, moving slowly as though arranging items that had long since decayed. When he focused on it, the figure dissolved into the darkness, leaving him with only the faint scent of damp wood and the settling of dust. Others have reported seeing multiple figures gliding simultaneously through different streets, moving in patterns that suggest an intimate knowledge of the village and its ruined layout. The unexplained lights are perhaps the most unnerving aspect of Phantom Ridge. They flash unpredictably in windows of abandoned homes, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, often only lasting for a fraction of a second. A photographer visiting the village described attempting to capture one of these flashes, only for it to disappear as soon as his camera focused, leaving the window dark and lifeless once again. Some lights appear to float just inside the buildings. Others seem to move from window to window, tracing paths across facades in ways that defy logic. The combination of flickering lights and moving figures creates an atmosphere in which the ordinary rules of space and time feel suspended. Visitors frequently report an overwhelming sense of being observed. Even when the streets are empty, a weight seems to press down, as though unseen eyes follow each step. Footsteps echo faintly across cracked pavement, sometimes matching the pace of the visitor, sometimes coming from angles that defy explanation. One hiker described walking along the main street of the village when he sensed a presence behind him. Each time he turned, nothing was there, yet the sensation never dissipated, reinforcing the feeling that the village is aware of its intruders. Shadows shift in peripheral vision, figures appear and vanish, and the fog thickens in response to movement, all conspiring to create an environment of persistent unease. The streets and pathways themselves contribute to the disorienting nature of Phantom Ridge. Cracked roads wind unpredictably between overgrown yards and collapsed buildings, making it difficult for visitors to retrace their steps. Some report that streets seem longer than remembered, corners shifted, and houses appearing subtly altered when revisited. Shadowy forms often appear at the edges of these pathways, pacing, gliding, or watching, only to vanish when confronted. The village feels alive in these moments, not in the conventional sense, but as a place that observes, reacts, and interacts with the movements of those who dare to explore it. Local legend attributes Phantom Ridge's phenomena to its abrupt abandonment and the tragedies that unfolded there. Families left suddenly, lives were lost to illness or accident, and unresolved disputes left emotional energy lingering in the ruins. The figures gliding along streets and the unexplained lights may be the remnants of those who never departed, bound to familiar routes and routines. Paranormal investigators note recurring patterns. Certain streets consistently host sightings. Lights flash in the same windows, and the figures move in repeated paths. Even skeptics admit that Phantom Ridge exerts an influence that is difficult to explain, a persistent awareness that lingers in the fog and among the ruins. Visitors often leave Phantom Ridge carrying more than memories of abandoned buildings. Many report an ongoing sense of being watched, recalling fleeting glimpses of figures and flashes of light long after they have left. Some return, repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to confront the unknown firsthand. Others quietly depart, unnerved by the presence of what cannot be seen, the sensation of being followed, and the fleeting illumination of ghostly windows. Phantom Ridge impresses itself upon memory, a place where the past refuses to fade, and where every shadow, light, and movement holds significance. In Phantom Ridge, figures glide silently along empty streets, disappearing into the night, while unexplained lights flash in abandoned windows, illuminating fragments of history and memory. The cracked roads, ruined buildings, and thickening mist create a landscape where perception bends, reality becomes uncertain, and every visitor senses the lingering presence of the unseen. Phantom Ridge exists as a living memory, a place where the past endures shadows, move with intent, and the village watches silently, leaving every traveler with an indelible impression of mystery, unease, and the haunting beauty of what cannot be fully seen. Mistville, located deep within the forests of Wyoming County, is a place where the ordinary seems to dissolve into the uncanny. Once a small, lively settlement, it now lies abandoned, shrouded in dense woods and rolling fog that drifts through its cracked streets and overgrown yards. Visitors often report hearing the distant echoes of children playing, laughter carried on the wind. Though no children remain, shadows weave between the mist, moving with fluidity and intent, vanishing the moment they are looked at directly. Mistville is a village suspended between the past and present, where memory lingers in every corner, and unseen presences occupy spaces that were once filled with life. Approaching Mistville, travelers immediately notice how the surrounding forest seems to bend toward the village, branches curling over roads and casting jagged, shifting shadows. A low fog drifts in from the hills, thickening as dusk settles, softening the outlines of decaying homes and abandoned playgrounds. It is during these hours that the first signs of the village's unusual phenomena emerge. Figures, dark and indistinct, are often glimpsed moving between the mist, gliding across yards or along streets, only to disappear when one turns to confront them. Visitors describe a persistent sense of being watched, a feeling that the village itself is aware of their presence and responds subtly to every step. The echoes of children's laughter are perhaps the most haunting feature of Mist. Across open fields and through the cracked streets, the faint sound of playful voices can be heard, running, shouting, and sometimes singing. One visitor described walking past a dilapidated schoolhouse when a sudden chorus of giggles rose from the fog, circling around him as though children were playing hide-and-seek. When he paused and called out, the laughter stopped abruptly, leaving him with the eerie sensation of having been observed by unseen eyes. The sounds are disjointed, sometimes fading in mid-phrase, repeating snippets of playful cries that seem both joyful and melancholy. A lingering imprint of a life that no longer exists. The shadows of Mistville move with deliberate fluidity, weaving through the fog in ways that defy conventional perception. Some take human shapes, others appear elongated or distorted, but all vanish the moment they are directly observed. Visitors frequently report glimpsing a figure darting between trees or across the ruins of houses, only for it to disappear when they try to approach. One hiker recounted seeing a shadow gliding along the edge of a collapsed fence, following him as he moved down the street. Each time he looked, the figure was gone, yet the feeling of being followed persisted, leaving him increasingly unsettled by the invisible presence. The abandoned buildings themselves amplify the village's unsettling atmosphere. Wooden homes leaned precariously, roofs sagged, and windows shattered, while brick structures are cracked and overgrown with ivy. In some yards, rusted swings sway in the fog, and toppled toys litter the grass, as if waiting for children who will never return. Figures are occasionally seen moving inside these houses, pacing floors, or standing in doorways, vanishing when approached. One visitor reported peering through a broken window to see a shadow kneeling beside an overturned chair, motionless, before disappearing into the darkness of the room. These ruins serve as anchors for the lingering presence, spaces where echoes of life continue to interact with the living. The streets and pathways of Mistville further contribute to the disorienting sensation experienced by visitors. Cracked and uneven, they twist unpredictably, leading travelers past overgrown yards and collapsed structures in patterns that feel subtly altered each time they are retraced. Shadows frequently appear at the edges of these pathways, moving in synchrony with the observer, vanishing when directly confronted. The combination of movement, sound, and fog creates an environment in which perception bends, leaving visitors uncertain of where reality ends and spectral phenomena begin. Local legend attributes the hauntings of Mistville to the village's abrupt abandonment and the unresolved lives of its residents. Families left suddenly due to illness or misfortune, children disappeared, and disputes left emotional energy lingering in the fog-laden streets. The echoes of laughter and the shadowy figures may represent these lingering spirits. Bound to familiar routines and locations, paranormal researchers note patterns in the village, recurring sounds in specific areas, shadows appearing along consistent paths, and figures observed in yards, streets, and ruins. Even skeptics acknowledge the undeniable sense of awareness that pervades Mistville, a feeling that the village watches every movement with silent intent. Visitors often leave Mistville carrying a lasting impression of unease. Many report the sensation of being followed, hearing whispers or echoes of laughter in quiet moments, and recalling fleeting glimpses of figures in the fog. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness these phenomena firsthand. Others quietly depart, unsettled by the persistent presence of what cannot be fully seen or explained. Mistville leaves an indelible mark on memory, a village where the past refuses to fade, and where unseen presences continue to inhabit the spaces that were once alive with ordinary life. In Mistville, figures glide through fog-laden streets and yards, vanishing when observed. The echoes of children's laughter resonate across abandoned homes and empty fields, while shadows weave in and out of perception, shaping every visitor's experience. The overgrown paths, crumbling structures, and persistent fog create an environment where reality bends, memory persists, and the unseen watches silently. Mistville exists as a place where the past endures, where shadows and sounds carry the weight of lives once lived, and where every traveler leaves with a lingering sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence of the village itself. Coldwater, tucked away in the remote forests of Bedford County, is a village that time seems to have forgotten. Once a modest settlement, it now lies abandoned, its streets cracked and overgrown, and its buildings reduced to decaying remnants of wood and stone. Visitors report seeing shadowy figures near the old bridges that span the fog-laden streams and rivers. Moving with an eerie stillness, phantom footsteps echo across the empty roads, and whispered warnings drift through sudden gusts of cold wind, as though the village itself is alive with unseen observers. Coldwater is more than deserted. It is a place where the remnants of the past persist, and every step taken feels watched, measured, and quietly acknowledged. Approaching Coldwater, travelers notice the encroaching forest pressing against the village roads. Trees bend overhead, casting jagged shadows that twist with the fading sunlight, and a low mist drifts across the landscape, softening the outlines of decaying homes and abandoned bridges. It is during these hours, as dusk settles, that the first phenomena are often encountered. Figures appear near the old bridges, dark and indistinct, gliding along the railings or pacing slowly beside the streams. Their forms are rarely defined, shifting at the edges like smoke, disappearing the moment a visitor moves closer. The sensation of being watched is pervasive, leaving travelers tense and hyper-aware of every creaking board, rustling leaf, or distant splash of water. The bridges of Coldwater hold particular significance in the village's haunting reputation. Constructed decades ago, they are simple wooden spans with railings weathered by rain, snow, and time. Shadowy figures are often seen standing on these bridges, gazing down at the water, pacing along the boards, or gliding silently from one end to the other. Some visitors report seeing multiple figures at once, moving in coordinated patterns as if following routines from a lifelong past. Attempts to approach the apparitions invariably fail. They dissolve into mist or vanish entirely, leaving only the sound of wind or the faint creak of the bridge beneath the visitor's feet. One traveler recounted standing on an old bridge when a figure appeared on the far end, motionless, before slowly fading as he attempted to approach. leaving him with the echo of a presence that was never fully gone. Phantom footsteps add to the village's unsettling atmosphere. Visitors often hear sounds that mimic their own movements. Footsteps following across cracked roads, wooden planks, or gravel paths. Sometimes the sounds precede the visitor. Sometimes they fall behind, coming from impossible angles. A hiker described walking along the main street when the sound of footsteps began behind him, keeping pace with each step he took. When he stopped and turned, the street was empty. Yet the rhythm of steps continued for several moments, fading only when he resumed walking. These auditory experiences intensify the sense that Coldwater is aware of those who enter, responding subtly and persistently to human presence. Whispered warnings are another hallmark of Coldwater's haunting. Carried on gusts of cold wind that swirled through empty streets and across abandoned fields. The whispers often repeat fragmented phrases or cautionary words that are difficult to interpret. One visitor described hearing a soft warning as she crossed a bridge, words that seemed to urge caution, urging her not to linger, yet vanishing before they could be fully understood. These murmurs appear to follow travelers, drifting in and out of perception, creating an environment in which the unseen exerts influence without ever revealing itself directly. The abandoned homes and crumbling structures of Coldwater further anchor the haunting. Wooden houses lean precariously, roofs sagging, windows broken or boarded, and yards overtaken by wild vegetation. Figures are occasionally glimpsed moving inside these homes, standing in doorways, pacing floors, or disappearing through walls. One visitor peered through a shattered window to see a shadow crossing a room, only to vanish when he focused on it. Rusted tools, toppled furniture, and remnants of domestic life linger amid the ruins, lending a sense of presence to the past that is difficult to ignore. Local legend suggests that the haunting of Coldwater stems from abrupt departures and unresolved tragedies. Families left suddenly, lives were lost to illness, accidents occurred near the bridges, and disputes left lingering energy throughout the village. The figures seen near bridges and moving through the streets may be spirits bound to familiar paths, echoes of those who never departed. Paranormal researchers have observed recurring patterns. Certain bridges consistently host sightings. Footsteps appear at predictable intervals, and whispers are reported along specific routes. Even skeptics concede that Coldwater exerts a persistent, almost conscious influence over its visitors, a sense that the village is aware and responding. Visitors often leave Coldwater carrying a lingering impression of unease, many reports feeling followed long after they have left, hearing the echoes of footsteps in quiet moments, and recalling fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures on bridges or along the streets. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the phenomena firsthand. Others quietly depart, unnerved by the persistent awareness of unseen presences. Coldwater leaves an indelible mark on memory, a place where the past refuses to fade, and where every visitor experiences the lingering weight of what cannot be fully seen. In Coldwater, figures glide along abandoned streets, pausing near old bridges, moving with deliberate intent, yet vanishing when approached. Phantom footsteps echo in perfect synchrony with visitors' movements, and whispered warnings drift through sudden gusts of cold wind. The abandoned homes, overgrown yards, and crumbling bridges create a landscape where perception bends, memory lingers, and unseen presences watch silently. Coldwater exists as a place where the past endures, where shadows and whispers carry the imprint of lives once lived, and where every traveler leaves with an unforgettable sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence of a village that refuses to be forgotten. Fogmere, nestled deep in the dense forests of Sullivan County, is a village that seems suspended between reality and memory. Once a thriving community, it now lies abandoned, its streets cracked, yards overgrown, and buildings reduced to hollow shells of timber and stone. Visitors report seeing fleeting forms pacing silently through the ruins, shadowy figures that vanish when approached, leaving only the subtle imprint of movement on the imagination. Shadows stretch unnaturally among the trees and decaying structures, bending and twisting in ways that defy the eye. Fogmere is not merely deserted, it is alive with the presence of the unseen, a place where time seems to fold and the past refuses to fade. Approaching Fogmere, travelers first notice the way the surrounding forest presses inward. Thick branches arch over cracked roads, casting shifting shadows that twist with the setting sun. A low, heavy fog drifts across the village in the late afternoon, thickening as night falls, blurring the outlines of collapsed homes and crumbling fences. It is during these hours that the first phenomena become apparent. Fleeting forms are seen pacing along streets and through overgrown yards, moving with deliberate, silent intent. Observers describe these figures as dark silhouettes, sometimes human in shape, sometimes elongated or distorted, vanishing when directly confronted. The village seems aware of its visitors, every step met with a subtle response that heightens unease and suspicion. The ruins themselves create a landscape ripe for spectral impressions. Wooden houses lean precariously, roofs sagged and windows shattered, while brick structures crumble beneath the weight of time. Inside, visitors have glimpsed shadows pacing floors or standing in doorways, only to disappear into the darkness when approached. One traveler described peering through a broken window to see a figure walking methodically across the room, as if retracing steps from a lifelong past. When she focused on it, the figure dissolved, leaving the smell of damp wood and the echo of distant creaks. Others report multiple forms gliding simultaneously through streets, yards, and the remains of homes, moving in patterns that suggest awareness, familiarity, and an unbroken link to the village's former inhabitants. Shadows in Fogmere are particularly unsettling. They stretch and twist in unnatural ways, cast by nothing visible, moving independently of the light. Visitors describe seeing long, dark shapes slither between trees or along the edges of ruins, stretching across yards and suddenly collapsing to mere outlines. Some shadows appear to follow the observer's movements, others stand apart, seemingly waiting. Their unnatural angles and motions suggest an intelligence or consciousness beyond comprehension, reinforcing the sense that the village is not abandoned in the usual sense, but inhabited by presences that remain tethered to familiar paths and locations. Auditory phenomena accompany the visual. Footsteps echo across cracked roads and through empty homes, sometimes matching the visitor's pace, sometimes coming from impossible directions. A hiker recalled walking along the main street when soft, measured footsteps followed him, falling behind and then catching up in ways that defied logic. When he paused, the steps stopped, resuming only when he moved. Occasionally, faint murmurs or fragmented voices float through the fog, repeating half-phrases or calling out names, as if the village itself speaks in whispers that reach only those who wander too close. These sounds, subtle and disjointed, amplify the pervasive sense of unease, creating an immersive experience of unseen observation. The streets of Fogmere are as deceptive as they are abandoned. Cracked pathways twist unpredictably between overgrown yards and ruined buildings, often appearing subtly altered when retraced. Visitors frequently report paths that seem longer than remembered, corners that shift, and shadows that appear in multiple locations at once. Figures often glide along these streets, appearing at the periphery of vision, pacing, observing, vanishing when attention is focused. The village seems aware, guiding perception, shaping experiences, and reinforcing the impression that every movement is observed and recorded by the unseen. Local legend suggests that Fogmere's hauntings stem from its abrupt abandonment and unresolved tragedies. Families left suddenly, children disappeared, and accidents claimed lives that were never fully mourned. The fleeting forms and stretching shadows may be the lingering spirits of those who never departed, bound to familiar roots, routines, and homes. Paranormal researchers have noted patterns. Figures appear along specific streets. Shadows stretch consistently among certain trees, and footsteps echo repeatedly in predictable areas. Even skeptics concede that Fogmere exerts an influence that cannot be explained by ordinary means. A persistent presence that remains in the fog and ruins, aware and reactive to those who enter. Visitors often leave Fogmere carrying a lingering impression of unease. Many report being followed long after leaving, hearing footsteps or whispers in quiet moments, and recalling glimpses of figures and unnatural shadows. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the phenomena firsthand. Others depart quietly, unsettled by the persistent sense of observation and the impossibility of fully understanding what they have seen. Fogmere leaves an indelible mark, a place where the past endures, where shadows and fleeting figures continue to move unseen. Ashen Hollow, hidden deep within the forests of Northampton County, is a village that exists in a perpetual shroud of mist. Once a small but lively settlement, it is now abandoned, its streets cracked, buildings decaying, and yards overrun with tangled undergrowth. Visitors report ghostly figures moving silently through the fog, drifting along deserted streets and among the ruins of homes that have long fallen into disrepair. Lights flicker unpredictably in broken windows or atop old lampposts, casting long, distorted shadows that stretch across walls, trees, and paths. Ashen Hollow is not merely a deserted village. It is a place alive with echoes of the past, a liminal space where memory and presence linger like the mist itself. Approaching Ashen Hollow, travelers notice the way the surrounding forest presses against the village, branches twisting and arching over the narrow roads, creating shifting patterns of shadow and light. By late afternoon, a dense fog rolls in, clinging to the ground and obscuring the ruins of homes, fences, and gardens. It is during these hours that the first signs of the village's haunting become apparent. Ghostly figures are often glimpsed moving through the mist, gliding along streets or standing near dilapidated doorways. Their forms are indistinct, dark and wispy, sometimes human-shaped, sometimes elongated or distorted, and they vanish the instant a visitor approaches. The sensation of being watched is pervasive, leaving travelers tense, aware of each subtle sound and movement in the fog. The ruins of Ashen Hollow amplify the eerie atmosphere. Wooden houses lean precariously, roofs sagging and windows shattered, while brick structures crumble under the weight of decades. Inside, visitors have occasionally glimpsed shadows pacing floors, standing silently in corners, or drifting through open doorways. One traveler described peering through a broken window to see a figure walking deliberately across a room, its steps echoing softly in the emptiness. When she focused on it, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving only the faint scent of damp wood and the rustle of the wind through broken shutters. Others have reported multiple figures gliding simultaneously along streets, through yards, or across the skeletal remains of gardens, moving with deliberate intent and patterns that suggest a consciousness bound to the village. Unpredictable flickering lights add to the unsettling nature of Ashen Hollow. Lights have been seen behind shattered windows, brightening then dimming without explanation, often illuminating fleeting glimpses of figures within the buildings. Visitors have described attempting to focus on these lights, only for them to vanish instantly, leaving the windows dark and lifeless once again. The interplay between mist, shadow, and light distorts perception, creating an environment where reality feels fragile and the ordinary laws of space and time seem suspended. Ghostly figures are most often observed moving with purpose along streets and through yards. They pace, glide, and sometimes linger near the edges of ruined homes, following invisible paths or performing tasks that no longer have meaning. A hiker recounted seeing a figure walking slowly along a narrow street, then pausing as if noticing his presence before disappearing into the fog. Others report seeing forms drifting in unison along particular routes, vanishing behind walls that are no longer standing or moving through trees that seem to bend to accommodate their passage. The village feels aware, responding subtly to visitors' movements, guiding perception, and creating a persistent sense of observation. Auditory phenomena accompany the visual, adding another layer of unease. Footsteps echo across empty streets, sometimes in sync with a visitor's pace, sometimes coming from impossible directions. Soft whispers drift through the fog, fragmented phrases, repeated words, or half-uttered sentences that seem to emanate from the ruins themselves. One visitor recalled walking past a collapsed home when he heard a distant murmur repeating his own name, accompanied by the soft scrape of movement across the floorboards. When he turned, nothing was there, yet the weight of unseen attention remained, amplifying the sense that the village itself is conscious, aware, and responsive. The streets and paths of Ashen Hollow are deceptive and disorienting. Cracked and winding, they often appear subtly altered when retraced, corners shifting, and ruins subtly rearranged. Shadowy figures appear at the periphery of vision, moving along paths or pausing at the edge of yards, vanishing when observed directly. The fog thickens in response to movement, further obscuring perception and creating the sensation that the village itself is shaping every experience. Visitors frequently feel guided or observed, as though unseen hands influence their journey, shaping encounters with figures, shadows, and flickering lights. Local legend attributes the haunting of Ashen Hollow to its sudden abandonment and the unresolved lives of its residents. Families left quickly, tragedies occurred, and disputes remained unresolved, leaving emotional imprints that lingered in the fog and ruins. The ghostly figures and flickering lights may represent these lingering spirits, bound to familiar routes and routines, performing motions and patterns that persist long after death. Paranormal investigators have observed recurring phenomena, figures moving along specific streets, lights appearing at consistent intervals, and shadows stretching along the same trees or walls repeatedly. Even skeptics concede that Ashen Hollow exerts an influence that is difficult to explain, a conscious presence that lingers in mist and ruin. Visitors often leave Ashen Hollow with a sense of unease that persists long after departure. Many recall fleeting glimpses of figures, unnatural shadows, and flickering lights. Some feel followed, hearing footsteps or whispers long after they have left. Others return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to confront the phenomena firsthand. Still, many quietly depart, unsettled by the village's persistent awareness and the weight of unseen observation. Ashen Hollow leaves a lasting impression, a place where the past endures, where shadows move with intent, and where every traveler senses the persistent presence of what cannot be seen. In Ashen Hollow, ghostly figures glide silently through mist-shrouded streets, shadows stretched unnaturally across trees and crumbling ruins, and flickering lights cast distorted patterns that shift and bend perception. The abandoned homes, winding streets, and pervasive fog create an environment where reality feels uncertain and memory lingers. Figures move with deliberate purpose, shadows respond to every movement, and whispers drift through the air, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines Ashen Hollow. Nightshade Village, tucked deep within the forests of Monroe County, is a place where the ordinary and the uncanny seem to coexist in uneasy balance. Once a modest settlement, it now lies abandoned, its streets cracked and overgrown, and its homes reduced to hollow shells of wood and stone. Visitors to Nightshade Village often report sudden chills that sweep across them without warning, accompanied by faint whispers that seem to emanate from unseen mouths. Shadows glide along abandoned paths, moving with deliberate intent, yet vanishing when approached. Nightshade Village is not simply deserted. It is a place alive with residual presence, where the past lingers in every creak of a broken floorboard, every rustle of the wind, and every distorted movement among the ruins. Approaching Nightshade Village, travelers notice how the surrounding forest presses inward, branches arching overhead to form shifting patterns of shadow on the cracked streets below. A low mist often drifts through the village, thickening as night approaches and obscuring the outlines of dilapidated homes, toppled fences, and overgrown yards. It is during these hours, when the light wanes and the forest hushes, that the first signs of the village's haunting become apparent. Shadows glide along abandoned paths, slipping through fog-laden streets or along crumbling walkways. Their forms are indistinct, sometimes human-shaped, sometimes elongated or distorted, but they vanish instantly when confronted. Visitors often describe a pervasive sense of being observed, leaving them tense and hyper-aware of every movement around them. The homes and buildings of Nightshade Village amplify the unsettling atmosphere. Wooden houses lean precariously, their roofs sagged, windows shattered or boarded, and brick structures crumbling beneath the weight of time. Inside, visitors sometimes glimpse dark figures pacing floors, standing silently in corners, or gliding through open doorways. One traveler described looking through a broken window to see a shadow moving methodically across a room, as if performing a task long abandoned. When he focused on it, the figure dissolved into darkness, leaving only the faint scent of damp wood and the settling dust. Others have reported multiple forms moving in synchrony along streets or through the ruins of homes, appearing and disappearing as if following paths imprinted on the very land. Sudden chills are another defining feature of Nightshade Village. Visitors often feel cold gusts that sweep across them without warning, sometimes carrying with them the sensation of invisible hands brushing against their shoulders. One hiker recalled walking along the main street when a wave of icy air swept over him, bringing the faintest whisper of a warning. The temperature shifts are abrupt and localized, intensifying the feeling that unseen presences are nearby, responding to movements, observing, or guiding. These chills, coupled with the whispering voices, create a deeply immersive sense of unease, reinforcing the impression that Nightshade Village is more than just abandoned. It is conscious. Whispers are a constant and unsettling presence. They emanate from unseen sources, drifting from open windows, empty yards, and dense clusters of trees. Sometimes the words are incomprehensible, fragments of sentences, half-spoken warnings, or names that are repeated without end. A visitor described hearing a soft, urgent murmur from an alleyway as he passed, calling out a name he did not recognize. When he turned to investigate, the alley was empty, the sound fading into the night. These whispered voices persist in creating a sense that the village is alive with residual memory, echoing emotions, conversations, and moments long past. The shadows of Nightshade Village move in ways that defy conventional understanding. They slip along walls, trees, and broken fences, sometimes appearing to follow a visitor, sometimes moving independently of the light or any visible source. Their shapes are fluid, elongating, twisting, and stretching across the cracked streets or fog-laden paths. Visitors often report the unnerving feeling that these shadows are intelligent, reacting to movement, subtly guiding, observing, or warning. The village itself seems to breathe in these forms, allowing them to appear and vanish according to some unseen rhythm. The streets and walkways of Nightshade Village contribute to the disorienting experience. Cracked and winding, they twist between overgrown yards and collapsed structures, often appearing subtly altered when retraced. Corners seem to shift, paths lengthen or shorten, and ruins appear subtly rearranged, enhancing the sense of dislocation. Figures glide along these streets, pausing at the edges of vision or along abandoned paths, disappearing when observed directly. The combination of mist, shadows, and movement distorts perception, leaving visitors uncertain whether what they see is real or conjured by the village's lingering presence. Local legend attributes Nightshade Village's hauntings to sudden abandonment and unresolved tragedies. Families left abruptly, accidents claimed lives, and disputes remained unresolved, leaving emotional energy trapped in the village's ruins. The ghostly figures, sudden chills, and whispered voices may be manifestations of these lingering spirits. Performing repetitive movements and uttering fragments of speech, that reflect lives once lived. Paranormal researchers have observed patterns in the village. Shadows appear along the same paths. Whispers repeat in particular areas, and figures glide along streets and through ruins in consistent routes. Even skeptics acknowledge that Nightshade Village exerts an influence that is difficult to explain. A persistent presence that watches silently and interacts subtly with intruders. Visitors often leave Nightshade Village carrying a lingering sense of unease. Many describe feeling followed, recalling fleeting glimpses of shadows, hearing whispers in quiet moments, and feeling cold drafts brush against their skin long after leaving. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to confront the village's mysteries firsthand. Others quietly depart, unsettled by the pervasive awareness of unseen presences. Nightshade Village leaves an indelible mark on memory. A place where the past endures, where shadows glide with intent, and where whispers and chills remind every traveler that the village is never truly empty. In Nightshade Village, ghostly figures glide silently along abandoned paths. Shadows stretch and move among trees and ruins, and sudden chills sweep across visitors with whispers drifting in the fog. The cracked streets, ruined buildings, and pervasive mist create an environment where reality bends, memory lingers, and unseen presences watch every movement. Figures move with deliberate intent, shadows react to perception, and whispers echo through the air, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines Nightshade Village. Mistbrook, a forgotten village in the rolling hills of Armstrong County, is a place suspended between history and haunting. Once a bustling settlement, it now lies abandoned, its streets cracked and overgrown, and its buildings reduced to skeletal remains of timber and stone. Visitors report shadowy figures appearing near old wells and the remnants of mills that have long ceased to function, moving with a deliberate, silent intent. Phantom sounds of daily life linger unnaturally in the fog. Children's laughter, the clatter of tools, distant voices calling names that seem lost to time. Approaching Mistbrook, travelers first notice the dense forest pressing against the village, branches twisting overhead and casting irregular shadows across cracked roads. It is during these hours, as the fog settles and the air grows cold, that the first signs of the haunting become evident. Figures appear near the old wells, gliding along their edges or standing in silent observation. Their forms are indistinct, sometimes resembling humans, sometimes elongated or warped, vanishing the moment a visitor attempts to approach. The sensation of being watched is immediate and overwhelming, leaving travelers tense and hyper-aware of the faintest sounds or movements around them. The ruins of Mistbrook contribute heavily to the unsettling atmosphere. The old mills, now roofless and partially collapsed, are frequently the site of spectral sightings. Visitors have reported seeing figures moving along the mill floors, performing motions that mirror the labor once required to operate machinery. Shadows drift past broken windows, pacing silently or pausing near decayed support beams, vanishing when approached. The wells silent and still seem to anchor these apparitions, suggesting that certain places within the village are imbued with stronger residual energy, linking the present to the echoes of daily life that persist long after the village was left behind. Shadows in Mistbrook behave unnaturally. They stretch along streets, weave between trees, and shift across walls in ways that defy logic. The village itself seems aware, a silent, patient presence shaping every encounter. Local legend attributes Mistbrook's hauntings to sudden abandonment and unresolved tragedies. Families left abruptly, mills closed, accidents occurred near wells, and disputes ended without resolution. The ghostly figures and phantom sounds may be manifestations of lingering spirits, repeating routines and uttering fragments of conversations from lives abruptly interrupted. Paranormal researchers note patterns. Certain wells consistently host sightings. The mills are hotspots for movement and sounds, and shadows often appear along the same streets or among particular trees. Even skeptics concede that Mistbrook exerts an influence that cannot be easily explained, a subtle, persistent presence that remains attuned to those who enter. Visitors often leave Mistbrook carrying a lasting impression of unease. Many report hearing phantom footsteps or distant laughter long after leaving, recalling fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures near wells and mills. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the phenomena firsthand. Others quietly depart, unsettled by the village's persistent sense of observation and the weight of unseen presences. And figures move with intent, and where every traveler senses the lingering echoes of lives once lived. In Mistbrook, ghostly figures glide silently near old wells and vanished mills. Shadows stretch and shift among ruins and trees, and phantom sounds of daily life drift unnaturally through the fog. The abandoned buildings, overgrown streets, and pervasive mist create an environment where reality bends, memory lingers, and unseen presences watch every movement. Figures move with deliberate purpose, shadows respond to perception, and sounds of a long-past life echo through the village, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines Darkwater, nestled deep within the forests of Lycoming County, is a village perpetually wrapped in thick, clinging fog. Once a thriving settlement built around a winding river, it now lies abandoned, its streets cracked and overgrown, and its buildings reduced to skeletal remains of wood and stone. Visitors report ghostly lanterns drifting through the dense fog, casting a dim, flickering light that illuminates paths that lead nowhere. Shadows move with apparent intent, gliding along streets, around ruined homes, and through twisted trees. Darkwater is not merely deserted, it is alive with the remnants of lives once lived, a village suspended between the tangible and the spectral, where unseen presences watch, guide, and sometimes ensnare those who dare to enter. Approaching Darkwater, travelers first notice the way the surrounding forest seems to press inward, branches arching overhead to create shifting, jagged patterns of shadow. As one nears the village, a low mist drifts across the roads, thickening as night falls and obscuring the outlines of houses, barns, and bridges that have long since fallen into ruin. It is during these hours, when visibility is poor and the air grows cold and heavy, that the first strange occurrences become evident. Ghostly lanterns appear along streets and pathways, bobbing gently as though carried by unseen hands. Their light casts long, distorted shadows across walls, trees, and debris, revealing glimpses of figures that vanish the instant a visitor attempts to focus on them. The ruins of Darkwater amplify the unsettling atmosphere. Wooden homes lean precariously, roofs sagged, windows shattered or boarded, while brick and stone structures crumble under the weight of decades. Inside, Visitors sometimes glimpse shadowy figures pacing floors, standing silently in corners, or gliding through open doorways. One observer described looking through a broken window to see a lantern-lit figure walking deliberately across a room, performing motions that echoed domestic tasks of a time long past. When attention was fully focused, the figure vanished into the fog, leaving only the faint smell of damp wood and the whisper of wind through broken shutters. Other travelers report seeing multiple forms moving simultaneously through streets and yards, gliding as if following routes still etched into the fabric of the village, appearing and disappearing without warning. The lanterns themselves are a focal point of the haunting. Some drift along streets, bobbing and swaying, while others seem to float above ruined homes or hang momentarily in windows before vanishing. Their light is dim but persistent, casting eerie glows on the fog and illuminating shadows that stretch unnaturally along buildings, walls, and trees. Visitors often describe trying to follow the lanterns, only to find paths seemingly rearranged, corners shifted, and buildings subtly altered from memory. The lanterns appear to guide, mislead, or observe, creating a sense that the village itself is aware of intruders and responsive to their movements. Shadows in dark water are equally unsettling. They move with apparent intent, slipping along streets, weaving through trees, or appearing at the edges of ruined buildings. Some shadows seem to follow visitors, mimicking their pace or movements, while others move independently of any light source. Shapes twist and stretch in ways that defy logic, bending along the fog-laden streets or through overgrown yards. Travelers often report the unnerving sensation that these shadows possess awareness, reacting to the presence of humans, guiding or warning in subtle, inexplicable ways. The fog, lantern light, and shadows combine to distort perception, creating a disorienting environment where reality feels fragile and the ordinary rules of space and time seem suspended. Auditory phenomena accompany the visual. Visitors often hear footsteps echoing along cracked streets, sometimes matching their own pace, sometimes coming from impossible directions. Faint murmurs or fragmented voices drift through the fog, repeating words, names, or phrases with an eerie insistence. One hiker recalled walking near a collapsed mill when a soft, urgent whisper called out from the mist, urging him to turn. When he did, no one was there, but the weight of unseen attention persisted, reinforcing the sense that the village itself is alive, aware, and reactive. Even without direct sightings, the combination of lantern light, moving shadows, and whispered sounds creates an immersive, unsettling experience. The streets and paths of Darkwater are deceptive and disorienting. Cracked, winding roads twist between overgrown yards and ruined structures, often appearing subtly altered when retraced. Buildings, fences, and trees seem to shift slightly with each pass, further confusing visitors. Figures glide along these streets and paths, pausing at the periphery of vision or near ruined homes, disappearing when observed directly. Lanterns bob gently, casting shifting light that exaggerates these movements and shadows, creating an environment where every sense is heightened and every step feels observed. Local legend suggests that Darkwater's hauntings stem from sudden abandonment, unresolved tragedies, and the deaths of residents whose lives ended abruptly or mysteriously. Ghostly lanterns may represent the lingering presences of those who once carried them, moving along familiar paths, performing routine tasks, or wandering in search of something lost. Shadows are thought to be manifestations of lingering energy, intelligent and responsive to the presence of outsiders. Paranormal investigators have noted patterns. Lanterns consistently appear along certain streets. Shadows glide along predictable routes, and whispers often emanate from specific ruins. Even skeptics concede that Darkwater exerts a strange influence, a presence that feels deliberate, attentive, and impossible to ignore. Visitors often leave Darkwater carrying a lasting impression of unease. Many report being followed by shadows or hearing whispers long after leaving, recalling glimpses of ghostly lanterns drifting across fog-laden streets. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the phenomena firsthand. while others quietly depart, unsettled by the village's pervasive sense of observation and unseen presence. Darkwater leaves an indelible mark, a place where the past endures, where shadows move with intent, and where every traveler senses the lingering awareness of a village alive with echoes of lives long gone. In Darkwater, ghostly lanterns drift silently through dense fog, casting distorted, flickering light on cracked streets, ruins, and trees. Shadows move with apparent intent, figures glide silently along abandoned paths, and whispers drift through the mist. The abandoned buildings, winding streets, and persistent fog create an environment where reality bends, memory lingers, and unseen presences observe every movement. Lanterns float, shadows respond to perception, and sounds of a life once lived echo endlessly, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines Darkwater. Hollow Mist, tucked deep within the rolling forests of Clearfield County, is a village where fog never fully lifts, and the line between the living and the spectral seems to blur. Once a modest settlement, Hollow Mist now stands abandoned, its streets cracked and overrun with weeds, its buildings reduced to skeletal frameworks of wood and stone. Visitors report seeing figures appearing silently in doorways, shadows that lingered just long enough to be noticed but vanished when approached. Whispered voices call out names softly, carried on the wind through empty yards and down abandoned streets. Hollow Mist is more than deserted. It is a place where echoes of the past persist, where unseen presences linger in hallways, ruins, and the lingering fog, quietly observing those who dare to enter. As the fog rolls in, thick and damp, it cloaks the village in a gray haze, softening edges and muting sound. In these moments, the first signs of the village's haunting become apparent. Figures appear silently in doorways of abandoned homes, lingering for a heartbeat before fading into nothingness. Their forms are indistinct, sometimes appearing fully human, other times elongated and shadowed, with movements that feel deliberate, as though bound to the very architecture of the village. Visitors often describe an immediate sensation of being watched, a feeling that intensifies with every step down the narrow, fog-laden streets. The abandoned buildings themselves amplify Hollow Mist's unsettling atmosphere. Wooden homes lean precariously, windows cracked or missing, roofs sagged from decades of neglect. Stone structures crumble beneath the weight of time, walls stained with moss and damp. Inside these ruins, visitors occasionally glimpse figures gliding along floors, standing silently in corners, or moving through open doorways. One observer recalled looking through the doorway of a collapsed home and seeing a shadowy figure linger near the threshold, its form indistinct but unmistakably present. As he stepped closer, the figure faded with the mist, leaving only the soft rustle of wind through broken shutters. Others have described seeing multiple figures appearing in succession along streets or near old wells, gliding along invisible paths as though replaying moments from lives long past. Whispered voices are a constant presence in Hollow Mist. They float through the fog, sometimes calling names directly, other times murmuring fragments of sentences or half-spoken phrases. The whispers are often faint, barely audible, yet carry an urgency that makes them impossible to ignore. One visitor described walking past a boarded-up house when a soft, urgent voice spoke her name from the shadows. When she turned, the doorway was empty, the sound fading as quickly as it had appeared. Others have reported hearing laughter, the scraping of furniture, or distant calls that seem to drift across streets that are otherwise silent. These auditory phenomena reinforce the sense that Hollow Mist is not simply abandoned but retains a lingering consciousness, attentive to the movements and presence of outsiders. Doorways, thresholds, and entrances are especially significant in Hollow Mist. Figures frequently appear in these liminal spaces, sometimes motionless, sometimes pacing silently. They seem aware of the observers, yet intangible, dissolving into the fog or into the walls when approached. Visitors often find themselves drawn to these doorways, following the presence of figures or attempting to interact with them, only to find the spaces empty upon closer inspection. The threshold becomes a symbol of the village, ambiguous nature, a space that is simultaneously part of the physical world and a boundary into the spectral. Where the past persists and unseen presences linger, the fog itself seems to participate in the haunting. It coils and drifts unpredictably, thickening or dispersing as figures appear or vanish. Shadows stretch unnaturally across streets, walls, and trees, moving independently of the light or any tangible source. Visitors often describe an unsettling sensation that the fog is alive, guiding attention toward certain ruins, figures, or paths. The interplay of mist, shadows, and whispered voices creates an immersive environment, disorienting and ethereal, where reality feels fragile and every movement is amplified by the village's pervasive awareness. Local legend suggests that Holomist's hauntings stem from sudden abandonment, unresolved tragedies, and the lingering presence of residents who departed abruptly or met untimely ends. Ghostly figures and whispered voices are thought to be echoes of lives interrupted, repeating actions, or uttering fragments of conversations bound to familiar spaces. Paranormal researchers have observed patterns. Figures consistently appear in certain doorways. Whispers emanate from particular streets, and shadows follow similar paths throughout the village. Even skeptics acknowledge that Holomist exerts a subtle but persistent influence, an intangible presence that responds to the attention and movements of visitors. Travelers often leave Holomist carrying a sense of unease that lingers long after they depart. Many recall fleeting glimpses of figures in doorways, shadows moving along streets, and whispers drifting through the fog. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to confront the village's mysteries firsthand, while others quietly depart, unsettled by the pervasive awareness of unseen presences. Fogshade, a forgotten village in Westmoreland County, lies perpetually shrouded in mist, its streets overgrown and its buildings crumbling beneath the weight of time. Once a thriving community, Fogshade now exists in a state of suspended abandonment, a place where the ordinary rules of reality seem softened by the thick, ever-present fog. Visitors report fleeting figures appearing at night, shadows that glide through trees and along deserted streets, vanishing as if swallowed by the mist. The village is not merely empty, is alive with the echoes of its past, where unseen presences move with deliberate intent, observing those who dare to wander its fog-laden paths. Approaching Fogshade travelers immediately notice the forest pressing close to the village, branches twisting overhead to form jagged patterns against the dim light. As dusk falls, a thick fog begins to roll across streets and sidewalks, obscuring ruined homes, toppled fences, and the skeletal remains of businesses long abandoned. It is during these hours, when visibility is low and the air grows heavy and cool, that the first strange sightings occur. Figures appear briefly along streets or among trees, their forms indistinct, sometimes human-shaped, sometimes distorted, but always fleeting. As visitors attempt to approach, these figures vanish, leaving only the sensation of being watched and the faint sound of movement dissolving into the mist. The village's buildings enhance the eerie atmosphere. Wooden homes sag under decades of neglect, windows broken or boarded over, while stone structures crumble, overrun with moss and vegetation. Inside, visitors sometimes glimpse shadows pacing floors or gliding silently across open spaces. One traveler described peering into the doorway of an abandoned house and seeing a faint figure move across the floor, its presence unmistakable yet ephemeral. When he stepped closer, the figure dissolved into the fog, leaving only the creak of decayed wood and the damp smell of the building. Others report seeing multiple figures moving in succession along streets, as if following a path preserved in the very architecture of the village, appearing and disappearing without warning. Shadows are perhaps the most unsettling aspect of fog shade. They glide along streets, between trees, and along crumbling walls, sometimes following visitors, other times moving independently of any light source. The fog enhances their presence, stretching their shapes across buildings or twisting them into unnatural forms. Travelers often report a disorienting sense of intelligence in these shadows, as though they react to movement or gaze, subtly guiding, observing, or warning. The interplay of mist and shadow bends perception, creating a disconcerting environment in which it is difficult to distinguish between solid objects and lingering apparitions. Nightfall brings a chorus of strange sounds. Visitors hear faint footsteps echoing on cracked streets, the rustle of leaves that seem to move against the wind, and occasional whispers drifting just beyond comprehension. The sounds are localized and fleeting, sometimes coming from empty homes or yards, other times from deep within the fog itself. One hiker recalled hearing laughter near a toppled fence, faint but distinct, echoing across the streets before fading entirely. Another reported hearing a whispered name from the direction of an old well, though when they turned, nothing was there. These sounds, like the figures and shadows, create the impression that fog shade is inhabited not by the living, but by the echoes of life that refuse to leave. The streets and walkways of fog shade themselves seem subtly altered, contributing to the disorienting experience. Cracked roads wind unpredictably between overgrown yards and ruins, often appearing slightly rearranged when retraced. Shadows glide along these streets, flickering between light and darkness, vanishing into the fog when observed directly. Figures appear suddenly at the edge of vision, pause, and then disappear, leaving visitors unsure whether they witnessed a presence or merely imagined one. The fog seems to respond to movement, thickening and swirling in ways that obscure the village further, bending perception and amplifying the eerie, timeless quality of the environment. Local legend attributes fog shades hauntings to sudden abandonment, tragedies, and unresolved conflicts that left emotional energy lingering in the village. Families departed abruptly, accidents occurred, and disputes remained unresolved, leaving echoes that imprint upon the structures themselves. Ghostly figures, fleeting shadows, and whispers are thought to be manifestations of these residual presences, replaying moments from the village's past. Paranormal researchers have observed patterns. Figures frequently appear in certain streets, shadows glide along repeated routes, and sounds seem to emanate from specific ruined buildings or tree lines. Even skeptics admit that fog shade exerts a subtle influence, a persistent presence that observes, reacts, and leaves a lasting impression on those who enter. Visitors often depart fog shade with a lingering unease. Many recall fleeting glimpses of figures among the mist, shadows gliding silently along streets, or whispers drifting through the fog long after leaving. Some returned repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to confront the village's mysteries firsthand, while others quietly leave, unsettled by the village's persistent watchfulness. Fog shade leaves an indelible mark, a place where the past endures, shadows move with intent, and every visitor senses the unseen eyes of presences that have not yet departed. In fog shade, ghostly figures appear fleetingly at night. Shadows glide with purpose through streets and trees, and whispers drift softly on the fog-laden air. The abandoned buildings, winding paths, and persistent mist create an environment where reality feels fluid, memory lingers, and unseen presences watch every movement. Figures move with deliberate intent, shadows respond to perception, and the echoes of life long past reverberate endlessly, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines fog shade. Gloomridge, a desolate village tucked into the hills of Fayette County, is a place where the veil between the living and the spectral seems impossibly thin. Once a quiet community, built along winding roads and dense forests, it now lies abandoned, its streets cracked, overgrown, and eerily silent. Visitors report ghostly forms pacing endlessly along roads, moving with a deliberate, inexorable rhythm. While flickering lights appear in windows where no light or even no home should exist. Gloomridge is more than a deserted village. It is a realm where the echoes of past lives persist, where every shadow and flicker of light hints at unseen presences that move with purpose, silently observing anyone who dares to wander its haunted paths. Approaching Gloomridge, travelers first notice how the surrounding forest presses close, branches twisting and reaching across the road, forming intricate shadows that shift as the wind moves. It is within this gray haze that the first signs of the village's haunting become apparent. Figures appear along the roads, pacing back and forth as though locked in routines that have existed for decades, or perhaps centuries. Their forms are indistinct, sometimes human, sometimes stretched or shadowed, but always fleeting. As a visitor attempts to approach, the figures vanish into the fog, leaving only the whisper of movement and the feeling of being watched. The abandoned buildings of Gloomridge amplify its eerie atmosphere. Wooden homes lean precariously, windows broken or boarded over, roofs sagged from years of neglect. Stone and brick structures crumble under the weight of time, walls covered in moss and decay. Visitors often glimpse shadows moving through the empty frames of windows or doorways. Figures gliding silently across floors, standing still for moments before fading into the dim light. One observer described standing on a cracked street and seeing a shadowy form pacing across the yard of a dilapidated house, carrying itself as though performing the routines of a long-forgotten life. When he stepped closer, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving only silence and the subtle creak of old timber. Visitors often describe following these lights, only to find the structures they illuminate subtly altered when viewed up close. Doors appear in different places, windows shift slightly, and corners of buildings seem displaced. These lights guide attention, mislead perception, and reinforce the sense that the village itself is alive, subtly shaping reality to confound and unnerve intruders. The roads of Gloomridge are as restless as the figures that pace them, cracked and winding, lined by decaying fences and overgrown yards. The streets often appear to shift when retraced, creating a sense of disorientation. Figures continue to pace along these paths, gliding silently and disappearing as they are approached. Sometimes, multiple forms appear simultaneously, each moving independently, yet following a rhythm that feels intentional, as if the village itself directs their steps. Shadows move between trees and along walls, extending unnaturally and responding to the observer's presence, heightening the sense that every movement in Gloomridge is noticed, catalogued, and mirrored by unseen eyes. Sounds accompany the village's visual hauntings. Footsteps echo on empty streets, sometimes matching a visitor's own pace, other times coming from directions that make no logical sense. Faint murmurs and fragmented voices drift through the fog, often repeating names or phrases in tones that are urgent yet ethereal. One visitor described hearing the soft, distant sound of a chair scraping across a floor inside a windowless house, the noise clear but source invisible. Another recounted a whispering call from the middle of a cracked road, a voice urging them to turn, vanish, or follow, but when they did, nothing was there. The combination of footsteps, whispers, and flickering lights reinforces the sensation that Gloomridge is alive with lingering consciousness, watching and interacting with those who enter. Local legend suggests that Gloomridge's restless hauntings are tied to sudden abandonment and unresolved tragedies. Families left abruptly, accidents occurred, and disputes remained unsettled, leaving emotional imprints that persist in the village's structures and streets. Ghostly figures may be echoes of past residents, endlessly retracing familiar paths, performing routines that were never completed. Flickering lights could represent lingering energy, briefly illuminating spaces where life once thrived. Paranormal researchers have noted consistent patterns. Certain roads hose recurring figures, specific windows regularly flicker, and shadows move along predictable routes. Even skeptics admit that Gloomridge exerts a subtle, persistent influence, a presence that feels deliberate, attentive, and impossible to ignore. Visitors often leave Gloomridge with a lingering unease. Many recall fleeting glimpses of pacing figures, shadows gliding through trees, or lights flickering in empty windows. Mistgulin, a long-abandoned village in the heart of Schuylkill County, is a place where the fog never lifts entirely, and silence carries a weight that feels alive. Once a modest mining town, Mistgulin now stands in ruin, its streets cracked, its homes leaning precariously, and its public buildings reduced to skeletal shells. Visitors who venture here speak of footsteps that seem to circle them endlessly, echoing along the empty roads and alleyways, and shadows that move independently of the mist, slipping between trees and abandoned structures before vanishing without warning. Mistgulin is not merely deserted. It is a place where the past refuses to rest, where every motion is observed, and every step through its fog-laden streets is accompanied by the presence of unseen, deliberate watchers. Approaching Mistgulin, travelers are struck first by the oppressive forest that surrounds the village. As dusk falls, a thick mist rolls across streets and sidewalks, softening the outlines of ruined homes and abandoned storefronts. It is in this veil that the village's hauntings become most evident. Footsteps echo along the cracked streets, sometimes following the observer, other times circling from directions that seem impossible. Visitors report an unnerving sensation of being trailed, the sound of shoes crunching or tapping along pavement, or rustling in the undergrowth. Yet, whenever they turn, the roads remain empty. The structures of Mistgulin are themselves a testament to decay and abandonment. Wooden homes sag under years of neglect, roofs collapsing, windows broken or boarded over. Stone and brick buildings crumble in on themselves, covered in moss, vines, and the creeping grasp of the forest. Inside, shadows flit along walls, across floors, or appear momentarily in doorways. Dissolving the instant they are confronted. One observer described peering through a broken window at a shadow pacing silently along the floor, only for it to vanish when he moved closer, leaving the room utterly empty. Others report multiple figures moving in succession through the streets, their movements deliberate yet ephemeral, as though performing routines preserved in the village itself. The shadows in Mistgulin are particularly disconcerting. They move with apparent intent, independently of the fog, slipping across streets, darting through trees, and passing along the remains of buildings. Some follow visitors for a time, mirroring steps, while others seem to move without reference to human presence at all. Shadows twist and stretch unnaturally, bending along walls or disappearing entirely into thin air. Observers often describe a feeling that these forms are aware of them, reacting to presence and gaze, creating a tense, suffocating sense of observation. The fog interacts with these shadows, thickening or dispersing in response to movement, further distorting perception and heightening the uncanny nature of the village. Footsteps and sounds accompany the visual phenomena. Visitors often hear soft steps echoing behind them or circling in open spaces. Occasionally, the sounds seem to mimic actions that once took place in the village: a chair scraping across a floor, a door creaking, or faint hammering in a distant shed. Whispers, unintelligible yet urgent, drift through the fog, sometimes repeating names, sometimes echoing fragmented phrases. One traveler recounted hearing a whisper call her name from the side of the road, urging her to turn, and when she did, the street remained empty, yet the sense of being observed intensified. These sounds, paired with fleeting shadows and circling footsteps, reinforced the idea that Mr. Glun is not only haunted by memories, but actively engages with those who enter its streets. The village's pathways themselves are disorienting. Cracked, winding streets twist between overgrown yards, ruins, and collapsed buildings. Observers often find that routes appear subtly altered upon retracing, corners shifted, or buildings slightly displaced from memory. Figures continue to pace along these streets, moving along invisible patterns that feel purposeful, yet always ephemeral. Shadows dart between trees or along walls, appearing just long enough to be noticed, then vanish completely, leaving observers uncertain whether they saw a presence or merely imagined one. The mist moves with the figures, curling and stretching unpredictably, creating an atmosphere that is as mesmerizing as it is unsettling. Local legend suggests that Miscalan's hauntings originate from sudden abandonment, mining accidents, and unresolved disputes. Families left abruptly, lives were lost underground, and lingering energy remained trapped within the structures and streets. Footsteps and shadows are considered echoes of these lives, replaying actions or movements that were never completed. Paranormal investigators have noted patterns. Shadows often appear in certain areas, footsteps follow consistent paths, and whispers emanate from specific ruins or tree lines. Even skeptics concede that Mistgulin exerts a subtle but persistent presence, one that observes, reacts, and leaves a lasting impression on anyone who enters. Visitors often depart Mistgalan with a lingering sense of unease. Many recall circling footsteps, shadows flitting just beyond sight, or whispers carried by the mist. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to confront the village's mysteries, while others quietly leave, unsettled by the pervasive feeling of being watched. Mistgalan leaves an indelible mark, a place where the past endures, shadows move with intent, and every visitor senses the presence of those who have never fully departed. In Miscalone, ghostly figures pace endlessly along cracked streets. Shadows glide with purpose between trees and ruins, and footsteps circle in the fog as if echoing from the past. The abandoned buildings, winding roads, and persistent mist create an environment where reality bends, memory lingers, and unseen presences observe every motion. Figures move deliberately, shadows respond to presence, and whispers drift through the air, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines Silent Mist, hidden deep within the dense forests of Pike County, is a village where fog drifts perpetually, and silence carries a weight that feels almost sentient. Once a quiet settlement of timber workers and small families, Silent Mist now lies abandoned, its streets cracked, overgrown, and lined with decaying buildings that lean precariously toward collapse. Visitors report figures appearing at the edge of visibility, fleeting forms that emerge from the fog just long enough to be noticed and vanish before they can be approached. Cold drafts sweep unpredictably through the empty streets, carrying muffled cries and whispers that seem to drift from nowhere and everywhere at once. Silent Mist is not simply deserted, is alive with the echoes of its past, a place where the unseen watches, waits, and moves with subtle intent. Approaching Silent Mist, travelers immediately sense the oppressive atmosphere. The surrounding forest presses in from all sides, branches twisting into jagged patterns overhead. As evening falls, the village becomes cloaked in a dense, rolling fog that softens edges, mutes sound, and obscures depth. In this gray haze, the first signs of the village's haunting emerge. Figures appear at the periphery of vision, lingering near broken doorways, leaning against crumbling walls, or pacing silently along deserted streets. They are often indistinct, sometimes appearing humanoid, other times distorted, as if shaped from shadows themselves. As visitors attempt to focus on these forms, they vanish, leaving only the sensation of being observed and the subtle rustle of movement through the fog. The buildings of Silent Mist amplify its eerie presence. Wooden homes sag under decades of neglect, their paint peeling and roofs caved in. Stone and brick structures crumble slowly, covered in moss, vines, and decay. Windows are cracked or boarded, doors hang crookedly on rusted hinges. Inside, visitors sometimes glimpse shadows shifting along floors, or figures standing motionless in corners, dissolving into the darkness when approached. One observer described peering through a doorway of a collapsed house and seeing a faint form leaning against the wall, as though waiting. When he stepped closer, the figure dissolved into the swirling mist, leaving only silence and the faint creak of old timber. Others report seeing multiple figures appear in sequence along the streets, moving with deliberate intent, yet always disappearing before contact. The cold drafts that sweep through Silent Mist are more than simple wind. They appear suddenly, moving along streets, through doorways, and across open yards, carrying muffled cries, distant footsteps, or fragmented whispers. One visitor recalled feeling a chill brush past her shoulder as a soft, urgent whisper called her name from the mist. When she turned, the street remained empty, yet the sense of observation and presence intensified. These drafts and sounds contribute to the sensation that Silent Mist is alive, subtly guiding, warning, or observing the movements of those who enter. Shadows in Silent Mist are particularly unnerving. They move independently of the fog, gliding along streets, twisting through ruined buildings, and weaving between trees. Sometimes shadows seem to follow visitors, mirroring their movements or pacing in anticipation, while other times they appear where no observer could logically see them. Shadows stretch unnaturally along walls, vanish mid-motion, and seem to react to presence, creating a tense awareness that every step, every glance, is noted. Their movements, combined with the drifting fog and sudden cold drafts, bend perception, making it difficult to distinguish the real from the spectral, the living from the echo of what once was. The streets and paths of Silent Mist themselves contribute to the village's disorienting nature. Cracked roads wind unpredictably between overgrown yards, ruins, and toppled structures. Visitors often find that streets appear subtly altered when retraced corners shifted, buildings slightly displaced, familiar paths seeming unfamiliar. Figures continue to pace along these roads, moving as if following patterns embedded in the village itself. Shadows dart between trees or along walls, appearing just long enough to be noticed before vanishing completely, leaving observers uncertain whether they saw something real or imagined. The mist moves in tandem, thickening and dispersing unpredictably, heightening the sense of unease and reinforcing the haunting atmosphere. Local legend attributes Silent Mist's spectral activity to sudden abandonment, tragedies, and unresolved conflict. Families left abruptly, lives were lost to accidents or misfortune, and unresolved disputes left emotional imprints that persist in the village. Ghostly figures pacing streets and standing at thresholds are thought to be echoes of these past residents, endlessly repeating actions or movements that were never completed. Cold drafts and muffled whispers are seen as remnants of lives and voices caught between worlds, briefly surfacing to make their presence known. Paranormal investigators have noted patterns. Figures often appear in the same locations. Whispers emanate from particular doorways or trees, and shadows follow repeated paths. Even skeptics concede that Silent Mist exerts a subtle, persistent presence that observes, reacts, and leaves a lasting impression on visitors. Those who leave Silent Mist often carry with them a lingering sense of unease. Many recall fleeting figures at the edge of visibility, cold drafts brushing past unexpectedly, or whispers drifting through the fog long after departing. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the village's mysteries firsthand, while others quietly retreat, unsettled by the pervasive observation of unseen eyes. Silent Mist leaves an indelible impression, a village where the past endures. Shadows move with intent, and every visitor senses the presence of presences that have not yet left. In silent mist, figures appear at the edge of vision. Shadows glide independently of the fog, and cold drafts carry muffled cries and whispers. The abandoned buildings, winding streets, and persistent mist create an environment where reality bends. Memory lingers, and unseen presences watch every step. Figures move deliberately, shadows respond to attention, and whispered voices echo through the air, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines silent mist. Hollow Fog, a long-forgotten settlement in the rolling hills of Lancaster County, is a place perpetually cloaked in mist. Once a quiet farming community, it now exists in a state of eerie abandonment. Fields lie fallow, barns sag under the weight of time, and the roads that once carried daily life are cracked and overgrown. Visitors to Hollow Fog speak of ghostly silhouettes moving among the abandoned barns, figures that appear suddenly, glide with deliberate motion, and vanish just as quickly. Whispers rise in sudden gusts of wind, repeating names long forgotten and phrases whose meaning has faded with the years. Hollow Fog is not merely deserted. It is alive with the echoes of its past, a place where unseen presences linger, watch, and occasionally reveal themselves to those who wander too far into its fog-laden streets. The first sign of Hollow Fog's presence is the fog itself. Even in daylight, a thick haze clings to the village, wrapping streets, fields, and barns in a gray veil. As dusk falls, the fog deepens, obscuring everything beyond a few feet and turning familiar shapes into shifting shadows. Within this haze, ghostly silhouettes begin to appear. Visitors report figures pacing along abandoned roads or moving silently near the crumbling barns. Sometimes the figures are distinct, almost human in shape. Other times they are distorted, appearing stretched or shadowed, as if the fog itself has given them form. No matter the shape, these figures vanish when approached, leaving behind only a cold draft and a lingering sense of being observed. The barns of Hollow Fog are particularly significant in its haunting. Wooden structures, once filled with livestock, tools, and the daily bustle of farm life, now lean precariously. Doors swinging on rusted hinges, roofs caved in. Visitors often glimpse silhouettes moving between these structures, pacing back and forth as though performing long-forgotten routines. One observer described standing near a collapsed barn and seeing a figure gliding across the yard, pausing to glance toward him before disappearing into the fog. Others report multiple figures moving in succession, appearing to follow paths that may have been familiar to the village's residents decades ago. The barns seem to act as magnets for these presences, as though the remnants of labor and life still cling to the wood and soil. Whispers are another defining feature of Hollow Fog. They drift through the village unpredictably, rising in sudden gusts of wind, soft at first, then sharper, more insistent. Names are called, often those of no living person, or phrases are repeated half-formed, fragmented, and impossible to fully comprehend. One visitor described hearing his own name whispered from the direction of a leaning barn, urging him forward. When he moved closer, the sound vanished, leaving only the soft hiss of the wind and the sense of unseen eyes following him. The whispers seemed to carry memory, fragments of conversations, greetings, or warnings left behind by the village's former inhabitants. These auditory echoes heighten the sense that Hollow Fog is not empty. It is inhabited by the past, a chorus of lingering presences reaching out across time. The roads and fields of Hollow Fog further amplify its eerie character. Cracked roads wind unpredictably between abandoned homes, barns, and overgrown fences, often seeming to shift subtly when retraced. Fields stretch into the fog, their boundaries obscured, making it easy for visitors to feel disoriented or lost. Ghostly silhouettes continue to move along these roads, often appearing in corners of vision, and shadows dart among the trees lining the fields. These movements, paired with sudden gusts carrying whispers, create an environment where perception is constantly challenged. Observers never feel alone, yet the figures and sounds remain frustratingly elusive, existing just at the edge of reality. Local legend attributes Hollowfog's hauntings to the village's abrupt decline and the tragedies that accompanied it. Families abandoned their farms, crops failed, and accidents claimed lives that were never properly mourned. The silhouettes are thought to be echoes of these lost residents, repeating actions and routines that were never completed, bound to the land they once worked and loved. Whispers are believed to carry fragments of conversations, instructions, or warnings from the past, fleeting attempts to communicate with the living, or perhaps echoes of unresolved emotion. Paranormal researchers have noted recurring patterns. Silhouettes often appear near specific barns. Whispers emanate from certain fields, and shadows move along predictable paths, suggesting a lingering intelligence or memory embedded in the village itself. Visitors frequently leave Hollowfog with a lingering unease. Many recall glimpses of figures in the fog, hearing their names whispered, or feeling watched as shadows flit just beyond sight. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or the desire to experience the village's mysteries firsthand, while others quietly leave, unsettled by the pervasive, unseen presence that seems to follow every step. Hollowfog leaves an indelible impression, a place where time feels suspended. The past endures, and every visitor senses the awareness of unseen eyes. In Hollowfog, ghostly silhouettes glide among abandoned barns. Whispers rise with sudden gusts, and shadows move independently through the mist. The crumbling structures, fog-laden roads, and fields reclaimed by nature create an environment where reality feels fluid. Memory lingers, and unseen presences observe every movement. Figures appear deliberately, whispers echo through the air, and shadows vanish without warning, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines Hollowfog. Final haunted hidden village, tucked deep within the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, is a place that seems forgotten by time itself. Hidden among dense forests and winding roads, this village is shrouded in thick fog that lingers even in daylight, softening the edges of cracked streets, crumbling buildings, and overgrown pathways. Once a modest community of families, craftsmen, and farmers, the village now stands abandoned, yet it is far from empty. Shadowy figures pace endlessly among the fog-covered streets, moving with deliberate purpose, as though performing routines preserved from lives long past. Flickering lights illuminate ruins and narrow alleyways, casting long, distorted shadows that vanish when approached. This is the final haunted village of Pennsylvania, where the past persists in every creaking beam, every silent window, and every drifting wisp of fog. Visitors first notice the pervasive fog that hugs the village. It rolls in from the surrounding hills, curling around structures, weaving between trees, and obscuring the distant edges of streets. Within this gray haze, shadowy figures appear. They glide silently along roads, step lightly over cracked sidewalks, and move between abandoned houses and shops. These forms are often indistinct, sometimes human in shape, other times stretched or blurred, but always fleeting. When a visitor steps closer, the figures vanish, leaving only the faint sense of motion and the weight of being watched. It is as if the village itself directs their movements, keeping them just out of reach, preserving the eerie rhythm of past life that still echoes through its streets. The buildings in the village contribute significantly to its haunting. Wooden homes sag with the weight of years, windows broken or boarded, roofs caved in. Stone and brick structures crumble slowly, walls covered in moss, vines, and decay. Alleyways twist unpredictably, opening into courtyards or narrow passages that seem to lead nowhere. Visitors frequently report seeing flickering lights in windows of houses long abandoned, as though some unseen occupant moves inside. The illumination casts distorted reflections across the fog, making familiar shapes appear strange, shifting, and alive. One observer recounted watching a light flash repeatedly in a collapsed home, revealing the silhouette of a figure pacing the interior, then vanishing entirely when approached. The streets themselves seem restless, cracked and uneven, lined with weeds, fallen fences, and toppled posts. They wind unpredictably, often seeming to change when retraced. Shadowy figures continue to pace along these roads, moving as if following a memory embedded in the village. Sometimes multiple figures appear simultaneously, their paths intersecting and diverging in patterns that feel purposeful. Visitors often report that the fog thickens around these figures, moving in concert with their presence, further distorting perception and creating the sense that every step is observed and mirrored. Footsteps echo from nowhere, sometimes matching a visitor's pace, sometimes circling from impossible directions, adding to the disorientation. Whispers drift through the village unpredictably. Faint at first, they grow clearer in sudden gusts of wind, repeating names, incomplete sentences, or fragmented phrases from long ago. Some visitors hear their own names, whispered softly from a distance, while others catch glimpses of past conversations, urgent warnings, or mundane instructions frozen in time. One traveler described hearing a conversation in a collapsed shop, the voices echoing as though replaying a routine that had been performed countless times. The words faded before any meaning could be grasped, leaving only a haunting sense of familiarity and loss. These whispers, paired with moving figures and flickering lights, reinforce the feeling that the village is alive with memory, endlessly repeating moments that never truly ended. The fog and shadows are not merely atmospheric, they appear almost intelligent. Observers often feel that the figures are aware of their presence, reacting subtly to movement and gaze. Shadows dart along walls, slip between ruins, and pause in corners to observe intruders. The fog curls around these forms, thickening or dispersing, as if to obscure or reveal them. Visitors report sudden chills when a figure seems to glide past, leaving no trace, and a quiet pressure, as if the air itself carries unseen eyes. The combined effect is a constant awareness that the village watches, waits, and silently records every step, every glance, and every breath. Local lore suggests that the hauntings of the village originate from abrupt abandonment and unresolved tragedies. Families left suddenly, lives were lost to accidents, illnesses, or disputes, and the remnants of those lives remain embedded in the streets, buildings, and fields. Shadowy figures are believed to be echoes of former residents, endlessly repeating routines and gestures from the past. Flickering lights represent lingering energy, briefly illuminating spaces where life once thrived. Whispers carry remnants of voices, memories, and emotions that remain trapped, surfacing unpredictably to remind visitors that the village is not truly empty. Paranormal researchers have observed consistent patterns. Specific streets, ruins, and alleyways regularly host recurring figures. Lights flash in predictable locations, and whispers emerge from certain corners or structures. Even skeptics concede that the village exerts a subtle, persistent presence, one that interacts with those who enter while leaving an indelible impression. Visitors leave the final haunted hidden village with a sense that is impossible to shake. Many recall fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures pacing streets, lights flickering in abandoned windows, or whispers brushing past their ears like the sigh of forgotten voices. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity, the thrill of confronting the unknown, or the desire to witness the village's mysteries firsthand. Others quietly depart, unsettled by the weight of unseen observation and the knowledge that these echoes of past lives continue endlessly. The village leaves an enduring mark, a place where time feels suspended, the past persists, and the presence of lost spirits lingers in every corner, alleyway, and shadow. In the final haunted, hidden village, shadowy figures pace endlessly among fog-covered streets. Flickering lights illuminate ruins and alleyways, and whispers rise on sudden gusts, repeating names and fragments of lives long gone. The abandoned buildings, twisting streets, and dense mist create an environment where reality bends. Memory endures, and unseen presences silently watch every motion. Figures glide deliberately, shadows respond to attention, and whispers echo across space and time, leaving every visitor with a lasting sense of mystery, unease, and the haunting presence that defines the village.